Before the video starts, please leave a like and write any comment. Let's try to reach 1,000 comments and 2,000 likes. The channel has taken a hard hit recently, and I truly need your support. If everyone watching leaves one comment and one like, we can reach that goal together. And now, let's begin. I never should have gone to Manitou Lake. That's what I tell myself as I sit here in the darkness, listening to the sounds of something moving just beyond the reach of our dying campfire. The others are sleeping now, or pretending to. I don't blame them. Sometimes ignorance, even feigned ignorance, is the only shield we have against terror. 3 days ago, I was excited about this trip. A chance to disconnect, to experience the remote wilderness of northern Idaho with my oldest friend Kai from Canada and his cousin Lachlan, who had flown in from Sydney. We'd planned this trip for months, a 7-day backcountry adventure through what the locals called the Forgotten Range, a remote section of mountains nestled at the border of Idaho and Montana. "You're going where?" my coworker had asked when I requested the time off. "Manitou? Isn't that some kind of Native American spirit?" I'd laughed it off. "It's just a name. The place is supposed to be incredible, pristine wilderness, hardly any visitors. Kai says there's a cabin his family used when he was young." I should have paid more attention to the way the locals in the last town had looked at us when we'd mentioned our destination. The gas station attendant, an older man with leathery skin and eyes that had seen too much, had paused while counting our change. "Manitou Lake?" he'd repeated. "That's Blackfoot territory, sacred ground." He'd pushed our change across the counter with a slight tremor in his hands. "You boys be careful up there. Stay on the trails." Kai had dismissed him with a casual wave. "My dad used to take me there as a kid. It's fine." "When was the last time you were there?" the attendant had asked. "About 15 years ago, I guess." The man had just nodded slowly. Things change. Now, as I sit huddled against the base of a massive pine tree, I wonder what exactly he'd meant by that. Had he known what stalked these woods? Had he been trying to warn us? We'd reached the trailhead late that first afternoon. The road had deteriorated into little more than a rutted path, forcing us to park Kai's SUV in a small clearing nearly 2 miles from where we'd planned. Already we were off schedule, but nobody seemed concerned. We'd shouldered our packs, checked our GPS, and headed into the forest with the confidence of men who believed technology would always keep them safe. The first night had been uneventful. We'd hiked about 4 miles in before making camp in a small meadow. Lachlan had marveled at the vastness of the American wilderness. "Nothing like this back home," he'd said, his Australian accent growing thicker as he relaxed by the fire. "I mean, we have the outback, but this is different. These trees feel ancient." Kai had nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "My dad used to talk about that. Said the Blackfoot believed these forests were alive in a way most people couldn't understand." I remember gazing up at the canopy then, at the way the massive trees seemed to bend inward, as if listening to our conversation. The stars had been brilliant that night, piercing through gaps in the branches overhead like eyes watching from another world. "What else did your dad tell you about this place?" I'd asked. Kai had fallen silent, staring into the flames. "Not much. He wasn't big on stories. But he did say there were places up here where the boundary between worlds gets thin." "What's that supposed to mean?" Lachlan had laughed. "I don't know, man. Native stuff, I guess. My grandmother was part Kootenai." Kai had shrugged. "Dad just said to respect the place, leave offerings at certain spots." "Like what kind of offerings?" I'd pressed. "Tobacco mainly, sometimes food." "For what?" Lachlan had asked. Kai had looked uncomfortable. "For whatever's out there." I remember how the fire had seemed to dim at that moment, how the sounds of the forest had quieted to an unnatural stillness. None of us had said anything more about it that night. The second day had been when things started to change. We'd hiked deeper into the wilderness, following a faint trail that Kai swore would lead us to the cabin. The forest had grown denser, the trees older and more gnarled. Twice we'd had to backtrack when the trail simply vanished, swallowed by undergrowth or deliberately obscured. I couldn't tell which. "This doesn't look right," Kai had admitted around midday. "It's been a long time, but I remember the path being clearer." "Maybe there was a storm," Lachlan had suggested. "Fallen trees, landslides, that sort of thing can change a landscape." I'd pulled out the map, trying to match our surroundings to the contour lines and landmarks. "According to this, the lake should be about 3 miles northwest. If we keep heading in that direction, we should hit it regardless of the trail." That had been our first mistake, leaving the trail. By late afternoon, we'd begun to realize we had a problem. The terrain had become increasingly difficult, steep ravines and dense thickets forcing us to detour again and again. When we checked the GPS, our position made no sense. According to the device, we'd been walking in circles despite maintaining a constant heading. That's impossible, I'd said, shaking the unit as if that might fix it. We've been going northwest all day. Kai had pulled out his compass, frowning as the needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. Weird. Maybe there's magnetic ore in these mountains? I should have recognized the signs then. I'd read stories online about places where technology fails, where compasses spin and GPS signals scramble. Places where the natural laws seem to bend. The old stories call them thin places, where the barrier between our world and others weakens. As the sun had begun to set, we'd found ourselves in a small clearing. With no better options, we'd made camp for the second night. That was when I first noticed the tracks. They'd circled our campsite, large impressions in the soft earth that resembled deer tracks but were somehow wrong. Too large, too deep, with an occasional impression that looked almost like a human heel. What do you make of these? I'd asked Kai, who'd spent more time hunting with his father than I ever had. He'd crouched down, running his fingers along the edge of one print. Deer, maybe elk, he'd said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They look weird, I'd pressed. Almost like they're just deer tracks. He'd cut me off, standing abruptly. Probably followed us hoping for food. I'd let it drop. But I'd noticed how Kai had insisted on building a larger fire that night, how he'd positioned his sleeping bag so he could see into the darkness beyond our camp. None of us slept well. This morning. Was it only this morning? We'd awoken to fog, not the gentle mist that often blankets mountain valleys, but a thick, choking fog that reduced visibility to mere feet. It had seemed to absorb sound as well, creating a bubble of silence around us that felt artificial, imposed. We should wait it out, I'd suggested. Hiking in this would be asking to get lost. We're already lost, Kai had replied grimly. And I don't like sitting here. In the end, we'd compromised, waiting until midday when the fog had lifted slightly before breaking camp. That's when Lachlan had found the markers, small arrangements of sticks and stones placed in patterns that were clearly deliberate. 3 sticks forming a triangle with stones at each point. They'd been set at regular intervals around our campsite, just beyond the clearing. Did either of you make these? Lachlan had asked, nudging one with his boot. Both Kai and I had shaken our heads. Maybe it's trail markers, I'd suggested without conviction. Left by other hikers, or warnings, Kai had muttered under his breath. Then, louder, we should get moving. I think I recognize where we are now. The lake can't be far. He'd been right about that much. We'd found Manitou Lake by mid-afternoon, a perfect mirror of dark water nestled in a valley between 2 ridges. From our vantage point on the hillside, we could see the cabin Kai had promised, a small, weathered structure on the far shore. See? Told you I'd find it, Kai had said, visibly relieved. That's the place your family used? Lachlan had asked skeptically. Looks abandoned. Even from a distance, I could see that the cabin had seen better days. The roof sagged in the middle, and what might once have been a dock jutted broken and twisted into the water. It's been a while, Kai had admitted, but it'll be shelter. Better than the tents if it rains. We'd made our way down to the lakeshore, picking our way through dense underbrush. The lake itself had been unnervingly still, its dark surface reflecting the clouds above like a perfect mirror. No fish jumped, no insects skimmed the surface. The silence had been complete save for our own movements. It's beautiful, Lachlan had said. But his voice had held a note of unease that matched my own growing discomfort. As we'd followed the shoreline toward the cabin, I'd begun to notice small details that heightened my sense that something was wrong. Dead fish lined the shore in places, their white bellies turned skyward. The trees nearest the water had a sickly appearance, their leaves yellowed and sparse. What happened here? I'd asked. Kai had shaken his head. I don't know. It wasn't like this before. When we'd reached the cabin, our hopes for comfortable shelter had evaporated. The door had hung askew on rusted hinges and the single window was shattered, its frame harboring a large wasp nest. Inside, the floor had been littered with debris, fallen ceiling plaster, animal droppings, moldering furniture. We can clean it up, Kai had insisted, though his face betrayed his disappointment. I'd rather sleep in the tent, Lachlan had said, wrinkling his nose at the musty smell that permeated the space. That's when I'd noticed the markings on the walls. At first I'd thought they were just water stains or mold patches, but as my eyes had adjusted to the dim light, I'd seen that they formed patterns. Crude drawings made with what looked like charcoal or ash, stick figures surrounding a larger, antlered shape, triangles and spirals, a crude representation of the lake with something emerging from its center. Kai, I'd called, my voice catching. Were these here before? He'd come to stand beside me, his breath catching audibly when he saw what I was looking at. No, he'd said quietly. Someone's been here. Kids, probably, Lachlan had suggested. Teenagers come out here to party, mess around. Yeah, Kai had agreed too quickly. That must be it. We'd spent an hour cleaning the worst of the debris from the cabin, but as dusk approached, none of us had wanted to sleep inside. Instead, we'd set up our tents near the shore, building a fire in a ring of stones that looked recently used, and now night has fallen completely. The fire casts dancing shadows on the trunks of the surrounding pines. The lake is a void of darkness beyond, occasionally reflecting the glimmer of stars when the clouds part. Kai and Lachlan retreated to their tents hours ago, but sleep eludes me because I've been hearing things. Movement in the underbrush that doesn't sound like any animal I recognize. A rhythmic tapping from the direction of the cabin, and twice now, I'm certain I've seen eyes reflecting the firelight from the tree line, not at ground level where a coyote or wolf might lurk, but higher up, as if whatever watches us stands on two legs. I tell myself it's nothing. Just the natural sounds of a forest at night, distorted by anxiety and unfamiliar surroundings. But I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched, assessed, that we've intruded somewhere we don't belong, and the rightful inhabitant is preparing to reclaim its territory. The fire pops loudly, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. In that brief flare of light, I see it, a figure at the edge of the trees. Tall and thin, with a head that seems wrong somehow, elongated or adorned. It stands perfectly still, and though I cannot make out its face, I know it's looking directly at me. I blink, and it's gone. My heart pounds in my chest as I scramble to my feet, nearly tripping over a root in my haste. I should wake the others, I think, tell them what I saw, but what exactly did I see? A deer, standing oddly? A trick of the shadows and my tired mind? I add another log to the fire, watching as the flames devour it hungrily. I will stay awake, I decide. Keep watch until morning. It's only a few more hours. From the direction of the cabin comes that tapping sound again, rhythmic, deliberate, like bone against wood. And from much closer, just behind me, I hear the snap of a twig. I whirl around at the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. For a fleeting moment, I catch a glimpse of movement, something ducking behind a massive pine tree. My breath catches in my throat. Hello? I call out, my voice embarrassingly thin in the night air. Is someone there? No response comes except the sudden hoot of an owl somewhere above me. I sweep the flashlight back and forth, its beam illuminating nothing but ancient trees and dancing shadows. Whatever I thought I saw is gone, if it was ever there at all. I force myself to take a deep breath, to think rationally. We're miles from civilization, in a wilderness area rarely visited. The chances of another person being out here are slim. More likely my exhausted mind is playing tricks on me, transforming ordinary forest movements into phantom threats. Still, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I make my way to Kai's tent, crouching by the entrance. Kai, I whisper, then louder. Kai, wake up. A rustling sound comes from inside, and then the tent flap unzips. Kai peers out, his hair disheveled, eyes blinking against the beam of my flashlight. What's wrong? He asks, instantly alert, despite being woken from sleep. I think there's something out there, I say, feeling suddenly foolish. I heard noises, saw something moving in the trees. Kai crawls out of his tent, zipping up his jacket against the night chill. What kind of something? I don't know. It was just a shape, but it was big and it seemed to be watching us. He grabs his own flashlight from inside the tent and scans the tree line. Probably just a deer or elk, maybe a bear, though they usually avoid camps with fires. It was standing upright, I insist. And there was something wrong with its head, like it had antlers but not quite. Kai falls silent, his flashlight beam freezing on a spot among the trees. There, he whispers. Do you see it? I follow his gaze, squinting into the darkness. At first I see nothing. Then a slight movement catches my eye, a shifting of shadows that doesn't match the swaying of branches in the gentle breeze, a darker patch of darkness that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it. What the hell is that? I breathe. Before Kai can answer, the shape melts away, seeming to sink into the ground or dissolve into the shadows. My skin prickles with goosebumps that have nothing to do with the cool night air. We should wake Lachlan, Kai says, his voice tight. I don't think we should sleep separately tonight. We rouse the Australian, who emerges from his tent grumbling until he sees our faces. What's happened, he asks, instantly serious. Kai explains what we've seen while I rebuild the fire. adding several large logs to create a blaze that pushes back the darkness. The three of us sit close to the flames, backs to one another so we can watch in all directions. Could be anything, Lachlan says after hearing our story. Your eyes play tricks in the dark. And this place, he gestures at the surrounding forest. It's enough to make anyone jumpy. Maybe, I concede. But I know what I saw. My dad told me stories, Kai says suddenly, his voice low. I didn't want to say anything before because it sounded crazy. Still does. What stories? I prompt when he falls silent. Kai stares into the fire, his face troubled. The Blackfoot and other tribes around here, they believed in creatures they called skinwalkers, shamans or witches who could transform into animals, or something between animal and human. Skinwalkers aren't hapless victims who fell prey to dark magic. They want to be monsters, Kai continues. In Navajo stories, skinwalkers are evil beings, witches, human sorcerers of dark magic who attain their status by committing specific atrocities, such as murdering a family member. Lachlan snorts. Come on, mate, you're not seriously suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Kai cuts him off. I'm just telling you what the stories say. My grandmother used to warn us about places like this. Said there were sacred sites where the barrier between worlds was thin, places humans shouldn't go. A chill runs down my spine that has nothing to do with the night air. And you brought us here anyway. Kai looks defensive. I was a kid when I came here with my dad. We fished, hiked, had a great time. Nothing weird happened. I figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far from camp. Well, they're effective, Lachlan mutters. So what do these skinwalkers supposedly do, besides stare creepily from the woods? They're hunters, Kai says simply. They isolate travelers, confuse them, make them lose their way. Then they pick them off one by one. Great, I say with forced lightness. Anything else we should know? Kai hesitates. They can mimic voices. Sound like people you know calling for help. A heavy silence falls over our group. The fire crackles, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night sky. From somewhere in the distance comes a long, low howl that sounds neither fully wolf nor fully human. Just a coyote, Lachlan says. But his voice lacks conviction. We should leave in the morning, I say. First light. Head back to the car. Kai nods. I think that's smart. I'm sorry I brought us here, guys. I didn't think. It's not your fault, I interrupt. You couldn't have known. And maybe we're all just freaking ourselves out over nothing. But even as I say the words, I don't believe them. The sense of wrongness has only grown stronger, a pressure against my mind, like the air before a thunderstorm. Should we take turns keeping watch? Lachlan suggests. I'm not sure I could sleep anyway, I admit. We agree to rotate, each taking 2 hours while the others try to rest. Kai takes the first shift while Lachlan and I retreat to our tents. Despite my earlier statement, exhaustion catches up with me quickly and I find myself drifting into an uneasy sleep. I dream of running through endless trees, pursued by something I cannot see but can feel getting closer with each labored breath. The forest around me seems alive, branches reaching to snag my clothing, roots rising to trip my feet. And always behind me the soft sound of footsteps perfectly matching my rhythm until they're so close I can feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I wake with a gasp to find Lachlan shaking my shoulder. Your turn, he whispers. Everything's quiet out there. Too quiet if you ask me. I check my watch, just past 2 a.m. The darkest part of the night. I grab my jacket and flashlight and crawl out of the tent. The fire has burned lower but still casts a circle of warm light. Beyond that circle, the darkness seems almost solid. See anything? I ask Lachlan as he prepares to turn in. Nothing moving, he says. But I kept hearing noises from the direction of the cabin, like someone walking around inside. I checked, he adds quickly, seeing my expression. But there was nothing there, just old floorboards settling, probably. I nod, not trusting myself to speak. The thought of Lachlan investigating the cabin alone in the dark sends a fresh wave of fear through me. Wake us if anything happens, he says, then retreats to his tent. Left alone, I add wood to the fire and settle in for my watch. The night presses in around me, and I find myself straining to capture every sound. The soft hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the gentle lapping of water against the lakeshore. Time passes with excruciating slowness. I check my watch repeatedly, dismayed to find that only minutes have elapsed when it feels like hours. To keep myself alert, I stand and pace the perimeter of our camp, sweeping my flashlight through the trees. On my third circuit, I freeze. There, caught in the beam of light, is a set of tracks that weren't there earlier. They look like deer prints but are deeper, as if made by something much heavier. and they lead directly to the edge of our campsite before veering away toward the lake. I follow the tracks cautiously, keeping the tents in sight. They lead to the water's edge and then, impossibly, continue into the lake itself. I shine my light across the dark surface, half expecting to see something staring back, but there's only the gentle ripple of water disturbed by a night breeze. As I turn to head back to camp, something catches my eye. A flicker of movement from the direction of the cabin. I swing my flashlight toward it, and my blood runs cold. Standing in the doorway of the dilapidated structure is a figure. Even at this distance, I can tell it's not human, not entirely. It stands too tall, its proportions wrong, and its head bears what look like antlers, but they're twisted, asymmetrical. For a long moment, neither of us moves. Then, with a deliberate slowness that's somehow more terrifying than any sudden movement would be, the figure raises an arm and points directly at me. I should run. I should wake the others. But I find myself rooted to the spot, unable to do anything but stare at the impossible creature before me. A distant part of my mind wonders if this is just another dream. If I'll wake gasping in my tent with nothing but the normal sounds of the forest around me. Then the figure takes a step forward, and the spell breaks. I stumble backward, nearly falling in my haste to retreat. I turn and run back to our camp, heart pounding in my chest. "Kai! Lachlan!" I shout, no longer caring about keeping quiet. "Wake up now!" They emerge from their tents, alarmed by the panic in my voice. "What is it?" Kai demands, reaching for his hunting knife. "By the cabin," I gasp. "I saw it. The Skinwalker. It was watching me." Kai grabs his flashlight and points it toward the cabin. The doorway stands empty now. "There's nothing there," Lachlan says, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. "You're scaring us half to death over shadows." "It was there," I insist. "Tall, with antlers. It pointed right at me." Kai's expression is grim. "I believe you. We need to leave. Now. Not in the morning. Right now." "In the dark?" Lachlan protests. "That's madness. We'll get lost or break an ankle on these trails." "We're already lost," Kai reminds him. "And I'd rather take my chances with the wilderness than wait here for that thing to come back." I nod my agreement. "We can follow the shoreline until dawn, then try to find our way back to the trail. Anything's better than staying here." Lachlan looks between us, then sighs in resignation. "Fine. But if I die falling off a cliff in the dark, I'm coming back to haunt both of you." We pack quickly, taking only essentials and abandoning anything that might slow us down. Within 15 minutes, we're ready to move out, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. "Stay close," Kai instructs. "If you see or hear anything strange, say something immediately." We set off along the lakeshore, walking as quickly as we dare on the uneven ground. The night seems to close in around us, and sounds carry strangely across the water. More than once, I think I hear footsteps behind us, only to turn and find nothing there. After about half an hour of walking, Lachlan stops abruptly. "Listen," he says, his voice tense. We fall silent, straining our ears. At first I hear nothing unusual, just the rustle of leaves and the soft lapping of water against the shore. Then it comes, a voice carried on the night breeze. "Help, please, help me." It's faint but distinctly human. A woman's voice, high with distress. "Hello?" Lachlan calls back. "Where are you?" "Don't," Kai hisses, grabbing his arm. "Remember what I told you, they mimic voices." "But what if it's someone who needs help?" Lachlan argues. "We can't just ignore it." The voice comes again, closer now. "Please, I'm hurt. Help me." "That's not human," Kai insists. "There's no one else out here." I shine my flashlight in the direction of the voice, seeing only trees and undergrowth. "We should keep moving," I agree with Kai. "Whatever it is, I don't think we want to meet it." Lachlan hesitates, then nods reluctantly. "Yeah, all right, let's go." We press on, moving faster now. The voice falls silent for a time, but I can't shake the feeling that we're being followed, that eyes watch our every move from the darkness. The shoreline becomes rockier, forcing us to slow our pace. Ahead, the lake narrows and the land rises sharply to form a natural choke point. As we approach it, Kai suddenly stops, holding up a hand for us to do the same. "What is it?" I whisper. He points to the ground before us. In the beam of his flashlight, I can make out more tracks, the same deer-like prints I saw earlier, but interspersed with them are what look unmistakably like human footprints. They weave in and out of each other, as if whatever made them was constantly shifting between forms. "It's ahead of us," Kai says quietly. "It's cut us off." "How is that possible?" Lachlan demands. "We've been moving fast." And we had a head start. It knows these woods, I say, the realization dawning coldly. It's been driving us in a specific direction, hurting us. The implications settle over us like a physical weight. We're not escaping, we're being corralled. What do we do? Lachlan asks, his earlier skepticism completely gone. Kai scans our surroundings, thinking quickly. We need to get to higher ground. If we can make it to that ridge, he points to a rise about half a mile to our right, we'll have a better vantage point. Maybe see a way out of here. It's our only plan, so we adjust course, moving away from the lakeshore and into the denser forest. The going is tougher here, the ground uneven and often steep. Tree roots reach out like grasping hands, threatening to trip us with each step. We've been climbing for perhaps 20 minutes when Lachlan, who's taken the lead, suddenly curses. The ground drops off ahead, he calls back. Looks like some kind of ravine. We join him at the edge of a sharp declivity. In the dim light of our flashlights, I can make out a steep-sided gulch about 15 feet across and of indeterminate depth. We'll have to go around, I say, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. Dawn still seems hours away, and our progress has been frustratingly slow. Wait, Kai says, pointing. There's something down there. I direct my flashlight where he's indicating. At first, I see nothing but shadows and the suggestion of movement that might just be branches swaying in the breeze. Then my light catches something that makes my heart stutter, a reflection, eyes staring back at us from the bottom of the ravine. Don't move, Kai whispers. Too late. The creature, whatever it is, has already seen us. I watch, paralyzed with fear, as it begins to climb the far side of the ravine, moving with inhuman speed and grace. In the shifting beam of my flashlight, I catch glimpses of a form that seems to constantly change, now running on all fours like a deer, now rising upright in a twisted parody of human posture. Run, I manage to choke out. Run. We turn and flee back the way we came, no longer caring about stealth or direction, driven only by the primal urge to escape. Branches whip at our faces, roots catch at our feet, but terror gives us speed and agility we didn't know we possessed. Behind us, I hear it coming. A swift, rhythmic movement through the undergrowth that gains on us with terrible inevitability. My lungs burn, my legs ache, but I don't dare slow down. Ahead, the trees thin and I realize we're approaching the lakeshore again. The cabin looms dark against the night sky, and for a wild moment I consider making for it. At least it has walls, a door we might barricade. But as we burst from the tree line, Lachlan suddenly cries out and pitches forward, disappearing from view. I skid to a halt, nearly falling myself, and realize we've reached a steep embankment leading down to a small cove. Lachlan, I call, peering over the edge. In the dim moonlight, I can just make out his form at the bottom, about 10 feet below. I'm okay, he calls back, his voice tight with pain. Twisted my ankle, that's all. Give me a hand. Kai is already scrambling down to help him. I turn to check behind us, half expecting to see the creature emerging from the trees. But the forest edge remains still and silent. Too silent. I follow Kai down the embankment, slipping and sliding on loose dirt and stones. Lachlan is sitting up, grimacing as he tests his injured ankle. Can you walk? I ask urgently. I think so, he says, accepting Kai's hand to pull himself upright. He puts weight on the injured foot and winces but doesn't fall. It's not broken, just sprained. We need to keep moving, Kai says, scanning the top of the embankment nervously. Where to? Lachlan asks. We're just going in circles. He's right, I realize. We've somehow ended up back near our starting point, despite walking for what must be over an hour. The cabin is visible through the trees, its broken silhouette like a jagged wound against the sky. The sun will be up soon, I say, not sure if I'm trying to convince them or myself. If we can just last until dawn. And then what? Lachlan demands. We're still lost. Our GPS isn't working. We don't know which way to go. Before I can respond, a sound reaches us that turns my blood to ice. The voice we heard earlier, but closer now, clear as a bell. Help me, please. I'm hurt. It comes from just beyond the embankment, at the edge of the trees where we had been moments ago. Don't answer it, Kai warns unnecessarily. None of us have any desire to call attention to ourselves now. We press ourselves against the embankment, trying to blend into the shadows. My heart hammers so loudly in my chest that I'm certain it must be audible, a beacon broadcasting our location to the hunter in the night. The voice calls again, but this time it's different, deeper, more masculine. Kai, is that you? Son, I've been looking everywhere for you. I feel Kai stiffen beside me. It sounds like my father, he whispers, his voice hollow with shock. It's not, I remind him, gripping his arm tightly. It can't be. Your dad's been dead for 3 years. The voice changes again, becoming mine. Guys, where are you? I found a way out. A chill runs down my spine at the perfect mimicry. Not just my voice, but my exact intonation, the way I speak when excited. Whatever this thing is, it's been watching us, listening to us, learning how to become us. What do we do? Lachlan whispers, his earlier bravado completely gone. I look around desperately, seeking some escape route. The cove we've landed in is small, with the embankment at our backs and the lake before us. To either side, rocky outcroppings limit our options. We're trapped. Unless the water, I say suddenly. We can wade along the shoreline. The tracks I saw earlier, they went into the lake but didn't come out. You think it won't follow us into the water? Kai asks. It's worth a try. And even if it does, we might have a better chance than on land. It's a desperate plan, but it's all we have. Lachlan nods grimly, adjusting his pack higher on his shoulders. Lead the way. We slip into the lake as quietly as possible, the cold water sending shockwaves through my system. It's deeper than I expected, quickly rising to our waists. The bottom is soft mud that sucks at our boots, making each step an effort. We move slowly along the shoreline, staying close to the bank but deep enough that we're mostly submerged. The water is black in the darkness, and I try not to think about what might be swimming beneath us. Right now, the creature hunting us from the shore is the greater threat. Above us, at the top of the embankment, a shadow appears. Taller than a man, with that distinctive antlered silhouette. It stands perfectly still, surveying the cove below. Though I can't see its face, I feel its gaze passing over us like a physical touch. We freeze, hardly daring to breathe. The cold water seeps into my clothing, numbing my lower body, but I barely notice. All my attention is focused on the figure above us. For a long, terrible moment, it remains motionless. Then, with a swift, fluid movement that's more animal than human, it descends the embankment, not climbing down as we did, but seeming to flow like water down the steep slope. It reaches the bottom and pauses at the water's edge, its head tilting as it studies the lake. In the faint light, I catch a glimpse of its face, or what should be a face. Instead, there's what looks like a deer's skull, the empty eye sockets, somehow blacker than the night around us. Don't move, Kai breathes, the words barely audible. The creature takes a step forward, its foot, cloven like a deer's hoof, touching the water's surface. It pauses, as if testing, then draws back. A low sound emerges from it, not quite a growl, but something older, more primal. The sound of ancient hunger. For several heart-stopping seconds it remains at the shore, watching us. Then, with the same fluid movement, it turns and melts back into the forest. We wait, hardly daring to believe our luck. The minutes stretch like hours as we strain our ears for any sound of its return. I think it's gone, Lachlan finally whispers. For now, at least. We should keep moving, I say, my teeth beginning to chatter from the cold. Follow the shoreline until we're well away from here. We continue our slow progress through the water, each step a struggle against the mud and cold. My waterlogged clothes weigh me down, and my fingers are numb where they grip my pack straps. After what seems like an eternity, we reach a point where the shore curves sharply and the embankment gives way to a gentler slope. We clamber out of the lake, our legs wobbling with cold and exhaustion. We need warmth, Kai says, looking at our shivering forms with concern. A fire. Is that safe? I ask, glancing nervously at the dark forest. If that thing wanted to take us in the water, it could have, he reasons. There must be something about it that prevents it from following us there. Maybe it can't swim, or maybe water disrupts whatever power it has, or maybe it's just toying with us. Lachlan mutters darkly. Despite his pessimism, we all agree that we need to warm up before hypothermia sets in. We find a small clearing about 20 yards from the shore and gather what dry wood we can find under the trees. Soon a small fire is burning, its heat a blessing against our chilled bodies. As we huddle around the flames, stripping off our sodden outer layers to dry, I notice a faint lightening in the eastern sky. Dawn is approaching at last. The night has seemed eternal, but morning is coming. What's the plan? Lachlan asks, voice hollow with exhaustion. We wait for full light, Kai says. Then we try to find our way back to the trail. Stay together, move as quickly as we can. I nod agreement, too tired to speak. The fire's warmth is seeping into my bones, bringing with it a dangerous drowsiness. I force my eyes to stay open, knowing that to sleep now might mean never waking again. I've been thinking, Lachlan says after a long silence. That thing, the Skinwalker. It drives people to isolation, right? gets them lost, separates them from help. That's what the stories say, Kai confirms. So it's intelligent. It has a strategy. Lachlan leans forward, his face serious in the firelight. What if we turn the tables? Use its own tactics against it. What do you mean? I ask. I mean, what if we're approaching this all wrong? Running away, hiding? That's what it expects. That's probably what all its victims do. He pauses, gauging our reactions. What if we hunt it instead? Kai stares at him like he's lost his mind. With what? We have one hunting knife between us. You can barely walk. And that thing, whatever it is, knows these woods better than we ever could. I'm not saying we take it in a fair fight, Lachlan clarifies. I'm saying we set a trap, use its nature against it. The idea is so outlandish that it takes me a moment to process it. What kind of trap could possibly hold a creature like that? Lachlan grins, a fierce expression in the firelight. You said it yourself, it wouldn't follow us into the water. That means it has weaknesses, limitations. We just need to figure out what they are and exploit them. I glance at Kai, who looks thoughtful now rather than dismissive. My grandmother used to say that skinwalkers could be repelled by certain herbs, he says slowly. Cedar, sage, and they're supposedly vulnerable to obsidian or silver. Great, I say, trying to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Anyone bring a silver bullet or an obsidian knife? No, Kai admits. But the cabin, my dad kept supplies there, old supplies. There might be something we can use. I think of the cabin with its disturbing wall markings and broken door. The last place I want to go is back there. But if there's even a chance we might find something to give us an edge against the creature hunting us, it's worth a try, I concede. But we wait for full daylight, and we stay together, no matter what. Lachlan and Kai nod in agreement. We fall silent, watching as the eastern sky gradually lightens from black to deep blue, then to the pale lavender of approaching dawn. The fire burns low, and I add the last of our gathered wood to the flames, knowing we'll need to move soon. As the first rays of sunlight pierce the trees, painting the lake's surface with gold, I feel a weight lift from my shoulders. We've survived the night. Whatever happens next, we've made it this far. But as I stand to stretch my stiff muscles, I notice something that sends a fresh chill through me despite the growing warmth of the day. There, at the edge of our small clearing, are tracks, the same deer-like prints I've come to dread. They circle our campsite completely, forming a perfect ring around us. And they're fresh, made while we huddled by our fire. The creature wasn't gone after all. It was watching us the entire time, so close we could have reached out and touched it had we known. And now, with daylight spreading across the land, I realize a terrible truth. Night may be the Skinwalker's domain, but daylight doesn't mean safety. Our ordeal is far from over. The morning light reveals the full extent of our predicament. We stand in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest on three sides, with Manitou Lake stretching dark and still before us. The tracks encircling our campsite are unmistakable now in the daylight, large, deer-like prints that occasionally elongate into something more human. It was right here, Lachlan says, crouching to examine the impressions in the soft earth. While we were sitting by the fire, watching us, I suppress a shudder, remembering how we had believed ourselves temporarily safe. The creature could have taken any one of us at any moment. Why didn't it? I ask aloud. It had the perfect opportunity. Kai shakes his head. I don't know. Maybe it's not just hunting for food. Maybe it's... He trails off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Playing with us, Lachlan finishes grimly. Like a cat with mice. The image is unsettling but fits what we've experienced, the way we've been herded, corralled, driven in circles back to our starting point. The Skinwalker, if that's truly what it is, seems to be enjoying our fear, prolonging the chase for reasons of its own. We need to get to the cabin, Kai says, stuffing his still damp jacket into his pack. If there's anything there that can help us, we need to find it fast. We break camp quickly, gathering our remaining supplies. Lachlan tests his injured ankle, wincing but declaring it bearable. The three of us set off along the lakeshore, heading back toward the cabin. Despite the daylight, I find myself jumping at every sound, scanning the tree line constantly for any sign of movement. The cabin comes into view after about 20 minutes of walking. It looks even more decrepit in the harsh light of day, the roof sagging dangerously, the walls weathered to a uniform gray. The single window stares like a blind eye, its glass long since shattered. What exactly are we looking for? I ask as we approach. Anything that might be useful, Kai replies. Tools, weapons. My dad was part Kootenai through his mother. He knew the old ways, kept some traditional items around. If there's anything that might work against a Skinwalker, it would be here. We approach the cabin cautiously, alert for any sign of the creature. The door hangs askew on its hinges, moving slightly in the morning breeze with a low creaking sound that sets my teeth on edge. The interior lies in shadow, and I find myself reluctant to cross the threshold. Kai goes first, pushing the door wider and stepping inside. Lachlan and I follow, our eyes taking a moment to adjust to the dimness after the bright morning light. The cabin consists of a single room with a small loft accessible by a ladder that appears too rotted to trust. A stone fireplace dominates one wall, its hearth filled with ancient ash and debris. A wooden table lists to one side in the center of the room, surrounded by the broken remains of what might once have been chairs. Against the back wall stands a massive old dresser, its surface thick with dust, and everywhere, covering nearly every inch of available wall space, are the drawings I noticed the day before, crude figures rendered in what looks like charcoal or ash. Most depict the same imagery, stick figures fleeing from a larger, antlered shape. But there are other symbols too, spirals, triangles, and complex patterns I don't recognize. What is all this? Lachlan asks, gesturing at the drawings. Kai approaches one of the walls, studying the markings closely. These aren't random, he says, his voice hushed. They're symbols, old ones. Some I recognize from my grandmother's teachings. He points to a spiral surrounded by dots. This represents a portal, or gateway. And these, he indicates a series of interconnected triangles, are protective wards. Someone was trying to defend themselves, I say, the realization dawning coldly. Whoever was here before us knew what was out there. Kai nods grimly. And they left instructions. He traces a sequence of figures that seems to tell a story. Human shapes approaching a lake, then an antlered figure emerging from the water, followed by more symbols, and finally a crude representation of the cabin surrounded by what might be a barrier of some kind. Instructions for what? Lachlan asks, peering over Kai's shoulder. How to survive, Kai says simply. Or at least, how to keep it at bay. He moves to the dresser, pulling open drawers that stick with disuse. Most contain nothing but mouse droppings and the tattered remains of clothing. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a moldering blanket, he finds something that makes him pause. Here, he says, carefully lifting out a leather pouch. It's old but well preserved, about the size of his palm. With reverent movements, he unties the thong that keeps it closed and tips the contents into his hand. Several items tumble out. A small carved figure made of some dark wood. A bundle of dried herbs tied with sinew. A handful of what look like polished black stones, and most surprising, a gleaming silver pendant on a leather cord. My father's medicine bundle, Kai says, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't think it would still be here after all these years. What is it for? I ask. Approaching to get a better look at the mysterious items. Protection, he says, picking up the silver pendant. It's shaped like a star with 8 points, intricate symbols etched into its surface. This is silver. Skinwalkers are said to be vulnerable to it, like werewolves in European folklore. He lifts the dried herbs next. Cedar and sage, for cleansing and warding. And these, he indicates the black stones, are obsidian, another material said to be effective against dark magic. And that? Lachlan points to the carved figure which resembles a wolf or coyote standing upright. A fetish, Kai explains, a representation of a protective spirit. In this case, Coyote, the trickster, but also sometimes a guardian against greater evils. He carefully returns the items to the pouch, then divides them among us. He keeps the wooden fetish for himself, gives me the silver pendant, and hands Lachlan the obsidian stones. The dried herbs he distributes equally. Keep these on you, he instructs. According to the old beliefs, they should offer some protection. I slip the pendant over my head, feeling slightly foolish but unwilling to dismiss anything that might help us survive. The silver feels cool against my skin, and I'm surprised by the immediate sense of comfort it provides. Psychological, surely, but welcome nonetheless. So what's the plan? Lachlan asks, pocketing the obsidian stones. Hide out here until help comes? Because I have to tell you, I'm not confident anyone's going to find us anytime soon. No, Kai says, studying the wall drawings again. The cabin isn't safe. These markings, they're not just records or instructions, they're warnings. Whatever was here before, it got inside eventually. I think of the unnatural silence that surrounds the cabin, the dead fish we saw along the lakeshore. So we keep moving, try to find our way back to the trail. Kai traces one particular sequence of symbols with his finger, figures approaching what looks like a mountain or large hill, with the sun directly overhead. I think these might be directions, a way out. Can you read them? Lachlan asks skeptically. Not exactly, Kai admits, but I recognize some of the landscape features. See this? He points to a distinctive shape that could represent a ridge or mountain peak. I think that's Thunder Mountain. It's about 5 miles northeast of here. If we can reach it, we might be able to get our bearings, maybe even find a ranger station. It's not much of a plan, but it's better than waiting for the Skinwalker to return. We quickly search the rest of the cabin for anything useful, finding an old hunting knife in a drawer and what might once have been a map, though water damage has rendered it largely illegible. As we prepare to leave, I notice something I missed before, a trapdoor in the floor, partially hidden beneath the tilting table. Look at this, I call to the others, pushing the table aside with a grating sound. The trapdoor has no handle, just a small hole that might once have held a rope or ring. I use the hunting knife to pry it open, revealing a dark space beneath the cabin. The smell that rises from it is dank but not unpleasant, earthy like a root cellar. I didn't know this was here, Kai says, crouching beside me to peer into the darkness. My dad never mentioned it. I shine my flashlight into the opening, revealing a small underground room about 6 feet square. A crude ladder leads down. The walls appear to be lined with shelves, and I can make out various containers and objects stored there. We should check it out, I say. Might be supplies we can use. Kai looks hesitant but nods. I'll go, you two keep watch. He descends the ladder carefully, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. The wood creaks but holds. Once at the bottom, he sweeps his flashlight around the small space. It's some kind of storage cellar, he calls up. There are jars, boxes. Looks like it was stocked for long stays. Anything useful? Lachlan asks, standing guard by the door. Most of it's ruined, Kai replies, examining the shelves. But wait. He falls silent, and I hear him moving something heavy. You guys need to see this. Curiosity overcomes my caution, and I descend the ladder to join him. The cellar is cool and surprisingly dry given its location. The shelves that line the walls hold an assortment of preserved goods, jars of what might once have been fruits or vegetables, now unidentifiable masses, boxes of supplies turned to dust, tools long since rusted. But it's what Kai has uncovered that draws my attention. A wooden chest pushed against the far wall, previously hidden behind a fallen shelf. It's not large, perhaps 2 feet long by 1 foot wide, and secured with a simple iron latch rather than a lock. Help me with this, Kai says, and together we lift the chest, carrying it to the ladder and passing it up to Lachlan before climbing out ourselves. In the better light of the cabin, we can see that the chest is carved with symbols similar to those on the walls, protective signs and wards, I assume. Kai opens the latch, and we all lean forward as he lifts the lid. Inside, wrapped in a surprisingly well-preserved piece of buckskin, is a book, or more accurately, a journal. Its leather cover is cracked with age but intact, and the pages, though yellowed, appear readable. Beside it lies a bundle wrapped in red cloth, roughly the size and shape of a large hunting knife. Kai lifts the journal reverently, opening it to the first page. The handwriting is faded but legible, written in a flowing, old-fashioned script. Journal of Thomas Blackwood, 1879. Kai reads aloud. Record of my experiences at Manitou Lake and observations of the entity known to the natives as Wendigo. Wendigo, I repeat. I thought we were dealing with a skinwalker. Kai flips through several pages, scanning quickly. Different tribes had different names for similar creatures, he explains. Wendigo, skinwalker, flesh-eater, they all describe beings that were once human but transformed into something other. He continues reading excerpts aloud. June 12, 1879. I have established my cabin on the shores of what the Blackfoot call Manitou Lake, Spirit Lake. Despite warnings from local tribes, I am determined to investigate the disappearances that have plagued this region. 3 trappers missing in the past year, all last seen near these waters. Kai turns more pages. June 20. Strange tracks observed around the cabin. Not quite deer, not quite human. The silence here is unnatural. No birds sing, no insects buzz. Only at night does one hear sounds, movement in the brush, whispers that might be the wind but seem to form words just beyond comprehension. A chill runs down my spine at the parallels to our own experiences. Kai continues to another entry. July 3. I have seen it. God help me, I have seen the creature that haunts this place. It emerged from the lake at dusk, water streaming from antlers that no natural deer could bear. It stood upright like a man but moved with the grace of a predator. It saw me watching from the cabin window and approached. I have drawn protective symbols as instructed by my Kootenai guide, but I fear they will not hold indefinitely. Kai skips ahead several pages. July 15. It speaks now, using voices it should not know. My wife's, my son's. It calls to me in the night, begging me to open the door, to come outside. The isolation wears on my nerves. I begin to wonder if I am going mad. If all I have seen is the product of a mind affected by solitude and fear. July 24. I have discovered its nature, I believe. Not Skinwalker as the Navajo would describe, nor quite the Wendigo of Algonquin lore, though it shares aspects of both. The Kootenai call it Manitou, the soul stealer. It feeds not merely on flesh but on fear, on isolation, on despair. It hunts by separating its prey from help or hope, by breaking them mentally before it takes them physically. I exchange glances with Lachlan, seeing my own unease reflected in his eyes. Kai finds a later entry, August 2. I have learned how to repel it, at least temporarily. Silver pains it, as does obsidian. The sacred herbs, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, create boundaries it cannot easily cross. But most effective is water. Natural running water seems to confuse its senses, mask the fear it tracks so effectively. I have taken to wading the stream daily, obscuring my trail and my emotional emanations. This confirms our earlier discovery that the creature wouldn't follow us into the lake. Kai flips to near the end of the journal, where the handwriting becomes increasingly erratic. August 18. It grows bolder. Twice now it has tested the barriers I have established around the cabin. The symbols no longer keep it at bay as effectively. I fear my time here grows short. I have created a weapon, a blade of silver mixed with obsidian dust, blessed by methods the Kootenai elder taught me. Whether it will prove effective, I cannot say. No one has ever wounded such a creature and lived to record the event. August 20. In what may be my final entry, I record what the elder told me of this creature's origin. Once human, a shaman who sought power through forbidden rituals, the consumption of human flesh, communion with spirits of the earth's dark places. The transformation was gradual but complete. It can be killed, the elder insisted, but only by severing the connection between what it was and what it has become. The heart must be pierced with silver while the creature is in its transitional state, neither fully human nor fully beast. Kai closes the journal, his expression grave. There are no more entries after that. So Blackwood didn't make it, Lachlan says quietly. Maybe not, I say. But he left this. I reach for the cloth-wrapped bundle still in the chest. It feels heavy in my hands as I carefully unwrap it. Inside is exactly what Blackwood's journal described. A knife, longer and heavier than a typical hunting knife, with a blade that gleams silvery in the dim light. The handle is wrapped in leather, and set into the pommel is a smooth black stone that can only be obsidian. Strange symbols are etched along the blade's length, similar to those covering the cabin walls. He made a weapon, I say, turning the knife carefully in my hands. The balance is perfect, the edge still remarkably sharp despite the passage of years. A weapon designed specifically to kill the creature that's hunting us, Kai says, his voice hushed with something like reverence. If you believe all this, Lachlan says, though his skepticism sounds forced now, after all we've witnessed. A magic knife to kill a mythological monster. You have a better explanation for what's been happening? I challenge. For what we've seen? He shakes his head, conceding the point. So what now? We go hunting for this thing? Try to kill it? No, Kai says firmly. We stick to the plan. Make for Thunder Mountain, try to reach safety. The knife is a last resort if it corners us. I carefully rewrap the blade and stow it in my pack, along with Blackwood's journal. The additional weight is negligible compared to the psychological boost of having some means of defense against the creature. We should go, I say, glancing at the window where sunlight streams through the broken pane. Make the most of the daylight. We gather our supplies, including some preserved items from the cellar that still seem usable. Dried meat of some kind that has remained surprisingly intact in sealed glass jars. A canteen that proves to be watertight once cleaned. Before leaving, Kai takes a handful of the dried herbs from his share and crumbles them into the fireplace, lighting them with his lighter. Fragrant smoke rises, filling the cabin with a sharp, clean scent. Cleansing, he explains. And it might mask our scent trail for a while. We exit the cabin into the bright midday sun, its warmth a stark contrast to the cool dankness inside. The lake stretches before us, deceptively peaceful in the daylight. Thunder Mountain is visible in the distance, its distinctive peak rising above the surrounding forest. 5 miles as the crow flies, Kai says, orienting himself. Probably closer to 7 with the terrain we'll have to cross. We can make it by nightfall if we keep a good pace, I say, trying to sound more confident than I feel. Lachlan tests his injured ankle, wincing slightly but nodding. I'll manage. We set off, skirting the lake's eastern shore before turning northeast toward the mountain. The terrain is challenging, rocky outcroppings, dense underbrush, and occasional boggy areas that force us to detour. But we maintain a steady pace, driven by the knowledge of what follows behind. For the first hour, nothing unusual occurs. The forest around us is quiet, but not unnaturally so. Occasionally we hear birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It's almost possible to believe that our experiences of the previous night were hallucinations, products of fear and darkness. Then Lachlan, who has taken the lead, stops abruptly. "Tracks," he says, pointing to the ground before him. I move up beside him to look. The familiar deer-like prints cross our path, heading roughly in the same direction we're traveling. They're fresh, the disturbed earth still damp where it's been exposed. "It's following us," I say, stating the obvious. "No," Kai corrects, studying the tracks closely. "It's leading us. These were made deliberately, left for us to find." "A trap?" Lachlan suggests. "Maybe," Kai admits. "Or maybe it's just toying with us still, letting us know it's there, watching." "Should we change course?" I ask, scanning the surrounding forest nervously. Kai considers, then shakes his head. "No. Thunder Mountain is still our best option. We just need to be more careful." We proceed with heightened caution, keeping closer together and maintaining constant vigilance. The silver pendant feels warm against my skin now, the whether from my body heat or some other property, I can't tell. My hand strays often to my pack where Blackwood's knife is secured. The afternoon wears on, and we make slower progress than hoped. Twice more we encounter the creature's tracks, always ahead of us, always pointing the way we're already going. It's unnerving, the sense of being herded, but we press on, lacking better alternatives. Around mid-afternoon we reach a small stream that cuts across our path. The water is clear and cold, running swiftly over a rocky bed. According to Blackwood's journal, water, especially running water, confuses the creature's ability to track us. "We should follow this for a while," I suggest. "Try to break our trail." Kai nods agreement. "Good idea. If we wade upstream for a half-mile or so, it might give us some advantage." The water is frigid, numbing our feet through our boots, but we persevere, carefully picking our way over slippery stones. After about 20 minutes of this difficult progress, we exit the stream on the far bank and continue toward Thunder Mountain, which looms closer now. The terrain becomes steeper as we begin the ascent of the mountain's lower slopes. The forest thins somewhat, giving way to rocky outcroppings and meadows of alpine flowers. Under different circumstances, it would be beautiful. Now the increased visibility is both blessing and curse. Easier to see our way, but also easier to be seen. "We should reach the first ridge by dusk," Kai says, pointing to a plateau visible about a mile ahead. "There's supposed to be an old fire lookout tower there. Not manned anymore, but it might offer shelter for the night." The prospect of a secure structure is heartening. We increase our pace despite growing fatigue, determined to reach the plateau before nightfall. The sun is already dipping toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the mountainside. We're within sight of the plateau when we hear it, a sound that stops us in our tracks. A human voice, calling for help. "Hello? Is someone there? Please, I need help." It's a woman's voice, high with distress, coming from a dense stand of pines to our left. Not the mimicry we heard the night before, but a voice filled with genuine fear and pain. "Hello?" The voice calls again. "Please, I'm hurt. I can't move." Lachlan looks at Kai and me, his expression conflicted. "That sounds real," he says quietly. "It's a trick," Kai insists. "It has to be. No one else would be out here." "But what if it's not?" Lachlan argues. "What if it's another hiker who ran into the same thing we did? We can't just leave them." I'm torn, wanting to believe it's just another of the creature's ploys, but unable to dismiss the possibility that someone genuinely needs our help. The voice calls again, weaker now, trailing off into what sounds like sobbing. "I'll check," I decide, retrieving Blackwood's knife from my pack. "You two stay here, keep watch. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, or if you hear anything strange, get to the plateau as fast as you can." "No way," Kai protests. "We stick together, remember? That's how it gets people, by separating them." 3 minutes then, I counter. Just enough to look. I won't go out of sight. Before he can argue further, I move cautiously toward the stand of pines, knife gripped tightly in my hand. The silver pendant hangs heavy around my neck, a strange comfort as I approach the source of the cries. The pines form a small grove, their lower branches creating a canopy of shadow despite the still present daylight. The voice has fallen silent, but I hear what might be labored breathing from within the gloom. "Hello," I call softly. Is someone there? A rustling sound comes from the deepest shadows, followed by a weak voice. Different now, male rather than female. Help me, please. I freeze, every instinct screaming danger. The voice has changed, exactly as Kai warned about the Skinwalker's mimicry. I start to back away, turning to rejoin my friends. Then I see it, partially hidden behind a massive pine trunk, a figure slumped against the tree. Human, or at least human-shaped, dressed in tattered clothing. Blood darkens the front of what might once have been a flannel shirt. The face is obscured by matted hair, but I can see a hand raised weakly in my direction. Please, the figure rasps, its voice changing again, becoming a blend of tones that no human throat could produce. So hungry, horror washes over me as the figure begins to change, its limbs elongating, its back arching unnaturally. The head rises, hair falling away to reveal not a human face but a deer's skull, empty eye sockets fixing on me with terrible awareness. I stumble backward, nearly dropping the knife in my haste to retreat. The creature rises, its transformation accelerating, human limbs twisting into something animal-like yet wrong. The chest expanding as ribs push against the tattered shirt. Kai! Lachlan! I scream, turning to run, but my way is blocked. Standing between me and escape is a second creature identical to the first, the same deer skull head, the same wrongly proportioned body, and behind it a third. My mind reels with the implications. Not one skinwalker, but many. Or perhaps, more terrifying still, one creature capable of creating multiple manifestations. I raise the knife, backing up until I feel the rough bark of a pine tree against my back. The creatures advance slowly, almost leisurely, secure in the knowledge that their prey is trapped. From beyond the grove, I hear Kai and Lachlan shouting my name. Then the sound of running footsteps approaching. The creatures pause, their skull heads swiveling toward the new sounds. Here, I yell, in the pines. There's 3 of them. The momentary distraction is all I need. I lunge forward, driving Blackwood's knife at the nearest creature. The blade connects with what should be its chest, sinking deep with surprising ease. A horrible screeching sound erupts from it as black ichor sprays from the wound. The creature staggers backward, the knife still embedded in its chest. For a moment, I think I've killed it. Then, with deliberate slowness, it reaches up and pulls the blade free, the wound closing almost immediately behind it. It tilts its skull head, regarding me with what I can only interpret as cruel amusement. Then it extends its arm, offering the knife back to me handle first, a mocking gesture that says more clearly than words, "Your weapons cannot harm me." Kai and Lachlan burst into the grove, stopping short at the sight of the 3 creatures. One still holds Blackwood's knife, while the other 2 have begun to circle around, cutting off our escape routes. The journal was wrong, I say, my voice strangled with fear. The knife doesn't work. No, Kai says, his eyes fixed on the creatures. Blackwood said it had to be in its transitional state, neither fully human nor fully beast. These have already completed their transformation, so what do we do? Lachlan demands. Run, Kai shouts, grabbing my arm. Now! We break in the direction of the plateau, the only gap in the creature's encirclement. Behind us, I hear them give chase, swift, silent pursuit that gains on us with terrible speed. The trees thin as we approach the edge of the pine grove, the plateau tantalizingly close. Lachlan, despite his injured ankle, takes the lead, his long legs carrying him faster than Kai or me. He breaks free of the trees first, sprinting across open ground toward the fire tower visible on the plateau's edge. I follow, lungs burning, legs pumping. Behind me I hear Kai cry out in pain. I turn to see him sprawled on the ground, one of the creatures looming over him, its clawed hand reaching for his throat. Without thinking, I change direction, charging back toward them. The creature looks up at my approach, momentarily distracted from its prey. It's enough time for Kai to scramble backward, regaining his feet just as I reach them. Go! I yell, pushing him toward the plateau. I'll hold it off. No! He protests. Together, the creature lunges faster than seems possible. I dodge barely in time, feeling claws tear through my jacket sleeve. Kai grabs a fallen branch, swinging it like a club to force the creature back. The water, he gasps, pointing. To our right, the stream we followed earlier curves around the base of the plateau. Remember Blackwood's journal? Understanding flashes between us. Together, we sprint for the water, the creature in close pursuit. 2 more appear from the trees, converging on our position from different angles. They're toying with us, I realize. They could have taken us at any time. But they're drawing out the chase, feeding on our fear. We reach the stream and plunge in, the cold water shocking after our exertion. The creatures stop at the water's edge, pacing back and forth with obvious agitation. One tests the water with a cloven hoof, then pulls back sharply as if pained. It works, I gasp. They can't cross. Not for long, Kai warns. Blackwood said it only confuses them temporarily. We need to reach the tower. We wade upstream, keeping to the deepest part of the channel. The creatures follow along the bank, their skull heads never turning away from us. Lachlan appears at the top of the plateau, waving frantically for us to hurry. After what seems like an eternity, we reach a point where the stream cuts into the base of the plateau. A steep path leads upward, switching back and forth to the top. We scramble out of the water and begin the ascent, slipping on the wet stones in our haste. The creatures remain at the water's edge, watching. Then, with a synchronicity that chills my blood, they turn and melt into the forest, disappearing from view. Where did they go? I pant, pausing halfway up the path. I don't know, Kai replies grimly. But we need to reach the tower before dark. We continue upward, reaching the plateau just as the sun touches the western horizon. Lachlan meets us at the top, his face pale with fear. What were those things, he demands. I thought you said there was one Skinwalker. I don't know, Kai admits. Maybe they're aspects of the same entity, or maybe what's been hunting us is something else entirely. The fire lookout tower stands about 100 yards ahead, a square structure atop stilts, with a cabin-like building on top, and a ladder leading up to it. It's old but appears intact, its metal components rusted but solid. We need to get inside before nightfall, I say, eyeing the rapidly darkening sky. Whatever those things are, they seem stronger after dark. We approach the tower cautiously, alert for any sign of the creatures. The area around the base is clear, with stone and gravel rather than vegetation. A fire break to protect the tower. The ladder leading up to the cabin is metal, its rungs worn but sturdy. Lachlan goes first, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. Kai follows, with me bringing up the rear, constantly scanning our surroundings for any sign of threat. The cabin at the top is locked, but the hasp is old and gives way easily when Lachlan applies force. Inside, we find a single room with windows on all four sides, offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. Basic furniture remains: a desk, a chair, a narrow cot, and most promising, a radio set bolted to the desk. Do you think it still works? I ask, hurrying to examine it. Kai shakes his head after a brief inspection. Power's long gone, and even if we could get it working, I doubt it has the range to reach anywhere helpful. I slump in disappointment. The tower offers temporary safety but no real solution to our predicament. We're still miles from any road or settlement, still being hunted by creatures that seem nearly impossible to fight. We'll rest here tonight, Kai decides. In the morning, we can try to reach the ranger station on the other side of the mountain. It should be about 3 miles from here. Lachlan secures the trapdoor through which we entered, placing the heavy desk over it for good measure. I check the windows, making sure each one is closed and latched, though the glass in 2 of them is cracked. As darkness falls completely, we settle in for another night of vigilance. The small space is cold but far more secure than our previous camps. We share what remains of our food, the preserved meat from the cabin and some energy bars that survived in our packs. What do we do if those things come back? Lachlan asks, voicing the fear we all share. They can't climb the ladder, Kai says with more certainty than I think he feels. And the tower's steel frame is too smooth for them to scale. We should be safe here. I want to believe him, but after what we've seen, it's difficult to have faith in any safety measures. I take out Blackwood's journal, flipping through its pages again in search of any information we might have missed. Most of it we've already read, but near the end, in what appears to be a hastily added footnote, I find something new. The elder warned that the Manitou is strongest when it has separated its prey from hope. Maintain belief in salvation, in escape. Its power diminishes when faced with unwavering spirit. To defeat it requires not just weapons but will. I share this with the others. So what, we just have to believe really hard that we'll survive? Lachlan says skeptically. Maybe it's more than that, Kai suggests. Many Native American beliefs hold that intention and spiritual strength are as real as physical force. If this creature feeds on fear and despair, then courage and hope might be poison to it. Worth a try, I concede. Not like we have many other options. As the night deepens, we take turns keeping watch at the windows, scanning the darkened plateau below for any sign of movement. For hours, nothing stirs. The silence is almost worse than any sound might be. a waiting tension that stretches nerves to breaking point. Then, around what I estimate to be midnight, Kai, who has the watch, stiffens. There, he whispers, pointing toward the edge of the plateau where we ascended hours earlier. I join him at the window, squinting into the darkness. At first, I see nothing. Then movement catches my eye, shapes emerging from the tree line below. Not 3 this time, but 5 or 6, their antlered silhouettes unmistakable in the moonlight. They approach the base of the tower with that same unnerving synchronicity, moving as if parts of a single organism rather than separate entities. They circle it once, twice, then stop, their skull heads tilting upward to look directly at our windows. Can they climb? Lachlan asks, his voice barely audible. I don't think so, Kai replies, but doubt edges his words. As if in answer to his uncertainty, one of the creatures approaches the ladder. It places a cloven hoof on the bottom rung, then pulls back as if burned. The metal, it seems, repels it somehow. Perhaps the steel itself, or more likely the traces of silver in the alloy. A strange sound rises from the assembled creatures, not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something in between. It sets my teeth on edge and sends a shiver down my spine. The creatures begin to circle the tower again, moving faster now, their movements taking on a ritualistic quality. What are they doing? I whisper. I don't know, Kai admits. But I don't think we should watch too closely. There's wisdom in his warning. Looking at the creatures for too long produces a strange vertigo, as if the boundaries between them and the darkness, between their forms and the night itself, are somehow fluid. We retreat from the windows, huddling in the center of the small cabin. The creatures continue their circling below, their strange cries rising and falling like some terrible tide. They can't get in, Kai says firmly, as much to reassure himself as us. We just need to wait until dawn. But as the hours pass, the creatures' behavior becomes more aggressive. They begin to slam themselves against the tower's support structure, causing the entire cabin to shudder. The metal groans but holds firm. They throw rocks and branches, some striking the windows with enough force to further crack the already damaged glass. Can we fight them? Lachlan asks desperately. Isn't there anything in that journal about how to kill them? I consult Blackwood's writings again, searching for anything we might have missed. Nothing certain, I admit, just what we already know. Silver or obsidian when they're changing form, not after. And even that's not guaranteed. A particularly violent impact rocks the tower, and one of the cracked windows shatters completely, sending glass shards skittering across the floor. Cold air rushes in, carrying with it the scent of decay that seems to accompany the creatures. Kai rushes to the opening, using his jacket to block it as best he can. We need something to cover this, he says urgently. I look around the small space and spot a metal first aid kit mounted on the wall. Pulling it down, I find it empty of supplies but intact. Its lid, when removed, is just large enough to cover most of the broken window. We secure it in place with duct tape from Lachlan's pack, creating a makeshift barrier. It won't stop determined entry, but it might slow it down. The assault on the tower continues through the night, with periods of intense activity followed by eerie silence. During one of these lulls, I hear something that makes my blood run cold. Voices, human voices, calling our names. Kai, help me! It's a woman's voice, familiar somehow. Son, please, they're hurting me. Kai's face goes ashen. That's my mother's voice, he whispers. But she's alive, back in Vancouver. It can't be her. They're trying to lure us out, I say, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Don't listen to it. The voices continue, changing to mimic people I know. My sister, my best friend from home. Then Lachlan's parents, calling for him in panic-stricken Australian accents. It's not real, Lachlan mutters, hands pressed over his ears. It's not real, but the psychological toll is evident. Each of us is being targeted with the voices of those we love most, those we would instinctively rush to protect. The creatures are attacking not just our physical shelter but our mental defenses as well. Through it all, I clutch the silver pendant Kai gave me, drawing strange comfort from its cool weight. Blackwood's knife lies on the desk before us, a reminder of failed hopes but also of human ingenuity and resistance. As the eastern sky begins to lighten with the first hint of dawn, the assault gradually subsides. The creatures withdraw to the edge of the plateau, their forms becoming indistinct in the growing light. By the time the sun crests the horizon, they have vanished completely, melting back into the forest below. We collapse in exhaustion, the night's terror giving way to a bone-deep weariness. But we can't afford to rest long. The creatures will return with nightfall, And we need to be well away from here by then. 3 miles to the ranger station, Kai reminds us, rousing himself with visible effort. If we leave now, we can make it by midday. And if the creatures are waiting for us? Lachlan asks. They seem weaker in daylight, I point out. And we know water confuses them. There's a larger stream on the other side of the mountain that we can follow. We gather our remaining supplies, including Blackwood's knife and journal. Before descending the ladder, we scan the plateau carefully, looking for any sign of the creatures. The area appears deserted, with only our own tracks visible in the dew-dampened grass. Cautiously, we climb down, weapons ready. I have Blackwood's knife, Kai his hunting knife, and Lachlan a makeshift spear fashioned from a broken chair leg with a sharpened end. We're painfully aware of how inadequate these would be against what we faced last night, but having them provides some psychological comfort at least. The morning is clear and cool, the sky a perfect blue that seems to mock the horrors of the night before. We set off across the plateau, heading for the trail that should lead to the ranger station on the mountain's far side. Our pace is brisk despite our exhaustion, spurred by the desire to reach safety before the creatures return. The path leads through a series of alpine meadows, bright with wildflowers that wave gently in the morning breeze. Under different circumstances, it would be idyllic. Now the open space leaves us feeling exposed, vulnerable. Keep your eyes open, Kai warns unnecessarily. Just because we haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not watching. We reach the far side of the plateau without incident and begin the descent toward the valley beyond. The trail here is steeper, requiring careful footing on loose shale and exposed roots. Lachlan, with his injured ankle, struggles the most, but determination keeps him moving. About halfway down, we encounter the stream Kai mentioned. Larger than the one we followed yesterday, its clear water rushing over a rocky bed. We pause to fill our water bottles and cool our faces in the refreshing flow. If we follow this downstream, Kai says, studying the terrain, it should lead us directly to the ranger station. It's built near where this feeds into a larger river. The decision made, we continue our journey along the stream bank. The going is easier here, the water having carved a relatively level path through the mountainside. Trees provide welcome shade as the day warms, and the constant sound of rushing water masks our own noise, giving a sense of security that may be false but is comforting nonetheless. After about an hour of steady progress, the forest begins to thin, and ahead we can see what appears to be a clearing. Kai, who has taken the lead, holds up a hand for us to stop. That should be it, he says, pointing through the trees. The ranger station is just beyond that clearing. Relief washes over me like a physical force. We've made it. Against all odds, we've survived the nightmare of Manitou Lake and its terrible guardians. A few hundred more yards, and we'll be able to call for help, to escape this wilderness that has nearly claimed us. We move forward eagerly, the prospect of safety lending new energy to our tired bodies. The clearing comes into view, a wide, grassy area surrounding a small, official-looking building with a radio antenna on its roof. A dirt road leads away from it, disappearing into the trees in the direction that must eventually reach civilization. Thank God, Lachlan breathes. I was starting to think we'd never make it. We step into the clearing, moving quickly toward the station. But as we draw closer, I notice something that dampens my rising spirits. The building looks abandoned. The windows are dark, the door closed. There's no vehicle parked outside, no sign of human presence. Is it manned? I ask Kai. It should be, at least during fire season, he replies, his own concern evident. And that's now. We approach cautiously. The station is small but solid. A single-story structure built to withstand harsh mountain weather. The door is locked, but a sign indicates that rangers patrol the area daily during summer months. Someone should be back today, Kai says, reading the notice. We can wait. If not, we can follow the road, Lachlan points out. It has to lead somewhere. I peer through one of the windows, cupping my hands against the glass to block the glare. The interior is neat and orderly, a desk with a radio setup, filing cabinets, a small kitchen area, and what appears to be a bunk room through a doorway at the back. But no sign of recent occupation. Let's check around the perimeter, I suggest. Maybe there's an emergency entrance, or at least a way to use the radio. We circle the building, examining every potential entry point. At the back, we find what we're looking for, a small window that's been left partially open, presumably for ventilation. I can fit through that, Lachlan offers. He's the tallest and slimmest of our group. With our help, he hoists himself up and wriggles through the narrow opening. A moment later, we hear the front door being unlocked from inside. Lachlan appears, grinning triumphantly. Welcome to civilization, he says, gesturing us in with a flourish. The interior is as I glimpsed through the window. Simple but well-equipped. Most importantly, there's a radio setup that appears operational. Kai immediately moves to it, examining the controls. "It's on," he says with evident relief, "and it looks like it has power." He picks up the handset and adjusts the frequency to what's labeled as the emergency channel. "This is Kai Nakamura calling from Thunder Mountain Ranger Station. Does anyone copy? Over." Static fills the room. Then a voice responds, crackly but intelligible. "This is Forest Service Dispatch. We read you. What's your situation? Over." Kai explains our predicament briefly. Lost hikers, in need of evacuation. He doesn't mention the creatures. That would only complicate things and might lead the rescue team to dismiss us as delusional or pranksters. Understood, the dispatcher replies. "We can have a team to your location in approximately 3 hours. Can you remain at the station until then? Over." Affirmative, Kai responds. "We'll stay put. Thank you. Over and out." He replaces the handset, turning to us with the first genuine smile I've seen in days. 3 hours. We just need to hold out 3 more hours. I check my watch. Just past noon. That means help should arrive around 3 p.m., well before sunset. We should be safe. Lachlan has already located the station's supplies, pulling out energy bars and bottled water. "Might as well make ourselves comfortable," he says, distributing the food. We settle in to wait, the relief of imminent rescue allowing the full weight of our exhaustion to surface. Lachlan stretches out on one of the bunks, asleep almost instantly. Kai sits by the radio, as if afraid to move too far from our lifeline to safety. I find myself drawn to the windows, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The creatures seem to prefer darkness, but after all we've witnessed, I'm taking nothing for granted. "Do you think they'll follow us here?" I ask Kai quietly. He considers the question, his face serious. "I don't know. They've been herding us all along, driving us away from the lake. Maybe this is what they wanted, to force us out of their territory. Or maybe they're just biding their time," I suggest grimly. "Waiting for nightfall." Kai nods, acknowledging the possibility. "Either way, help will be here in a few hours. Even if they do come, we just need to hold out until then." I want to believe him, to believe that our ordeal is nearly over. But as I stare out at the peaceful clearing, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That the creatures of Manitou Lake aren't finished with us yet. The silver pendant feels heavy against my chest, a reminder of all we've learned and experienced. I take out Blackwood's journal, turning to the final entries, searching for any insight that might help us in the hours ahead. The last page contains what appears to be a hastily scrawled warning. The handwriting barely legible. "They cannot be escaped, only confronted. The Manitou will follow those who have seen it until either they or it are destroyed. To flee is to delay the inevitable. Only by standing ground, by facing the fear it feeds upon, can one hope to survive." I close the journal, a cold certainty settling in my stomach. The creatures will come, and when they do, we'll need to make a stand, not just to survive the night, but to end this once and for all. 3 hours. We have 3 hours to prepare for the final confrontation with the shadows of Manitou Lake. Time passes with excruciating slowness as we wait for rescue. Lachlan continues to sleep, his body demanding recovery after our ordeal. Kai alternates between monitoring the radio and checking our supplies. I remain by the window, watching the clearing and the forest beyond with growing unease. The day is bright and clear, sunshine streaming through the trees in dappled patterns that dance across the ground. Birds sing in the branches, and occasionally a squirrel or chipmunk darts across the open space. It all seems so normal, so peaceful, a stark contrast to the nightmare we've been living. But I can't shake the sense of wrongness that has settled over me. It's too quiet, too perfect. Like the stillness before a storm. I check my watch, 1:30 p.m. Still an hour and a half until help should arrive. I turn from the window, deciding to make myself useful by taking inventory of the ranger station's resources. The small kitchen area holds basic supplies, canned goods, pasta, energy bars, and bottled water. A first aid kit hangs on the wall, far more comprehensive than the typical hiker's version. In a closet, I find emergency equipment, flashlights, batteries, flares, a weather radio, and most promising, a shotgun in a locked case. "Kai," I call, pointing to the weapon. "Think we can get that open?" He examines the lock. "Maybe, but do you know how to use a shotgun?" "I've gone shooting with my uncle a few times," I admit. "I'm not an expert, but I know the basics. It might not help against whatever those things are," he cautions. "But I suppose it can't hurt to try." The case requires a key we don't have, but Kai manages to pick the lock with surprising skill using a paperclip from the desk. Inside, we find a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a box of shells. Better than nothing, I say, checking that the weapon is unloaded before examining it further. It appears well-maintained, probably kept here for rangers to deal with aggressive wildlife. Let's hope we don't need it, Kai says, though his expression suggests he shares my doubts. We continue our preparation, gathering anything that might serve as a weapon or barrier. The silver pendant and obsidian stones Kai distributed earlier might be our best defense, based on what we've learned, but conventional weapons provide a psychological comfort if nothing else. At 2 p.m., I note a subtle change in the atmosphere. The birdsong that has provided background noise all afternoon suddenly ceases. The quality of the light seems to shift, though the sun still shines brightly. A heaviness settles over the clearing, a pressure like the air before a thunderstorm. Something's wrong, I say, returning to the window. Look, Kai joins me, peering out at the apparently empty clearing. At first, he seems confused. I don't see anything. Exactly, I point out. No birds, no animals. Listen. He falls silent, and the complete absence of sound becomes apparent. No wind rustles the leaves. No insects buzz, no distant stream babbles. The world outside has gone utterly still. They're coming, Kai says, his voice barely above a whisper. They shouldn't be active in daylight, but somehow, wake Lachlan, I instruct, moving to load the shotgun with hands that shake slightly. We need to be ready. As Kai rouses our sleeping companion, I scan the tree line again. This time, I catch movement, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows beneath the pines. Then another. And another. They're here, I call. At least 3 of them, maybe more. Lachlan joins us at the window. Sleep cleared instantly from his face at the urgency in my voice. I thought they couldn't come out in daylight, he says. Apparently they can, Kai replies grimly. They're just stronger at night. The creatures emerge fully from the forest, moving with that disturbing synchronicity we've come to dread. In the clear light of day, their wrongness is even more apparent. The deer skull heads mounted on bodies that seem to constantly shift between human and animal proportions, limbs elongating and contracting with each movement. 5 of them, Lachlan counts. More than before. They're not attacking, I note, watching as the creatures form a loose semicircle at the edge of the clearing, facing the station. They're just waiting. For what? Lachlan asks. Sunset, maybe, Kai suggests. Or for us to make a mistake. I check my watch again. 2:15 p.m. Less than an hour until help should arrive. We just need to hold out a little longer, I say, trying to inject confidence into my voice. The rescue team will be here soon. And what happens when they show up? Lachlan demands. Those things will attack them too. We're leading more people into a death trap. He's right, I realize with a sinking heart. We can't just wait for rescue, not with those creatures positioned to ambush anyone who approaches. We need to warn the team at minimum. Kai returns to the radio, adjusting the frequency to reach the dispatcher again. Thunder Mountain Ranger Station to Forest Service dispatch. Emergency update needed. Over. Static crackles. Then the same voice as before responds. This is dispatch. Go ahead, Thunder Mountain. Over. We have a situation, Kai says carefully. There are predators surrounding the station, possibly dangerous to the rescue team. Can you advise them to approach with extreme caution? Over. A pause, then. What kind of predators? Bears? Cougars? Over. Kai hesitates, looking to us for guidance. How do we explain what we're facing without sounding completely insane? Unknown species, he finally says. Multiple large creatures, extremely aggressive. We're barricaded inside the station for now, but any approaching personnel should be armed and alert. Over. Another pause, longer this time. I can imagine the dispatcher's skepticism. Understood, Thunder Mountain. I'll relay the warning. Rescue Team ETA remains approximately 45 minutes. Stay inside and maintain radio contact. Over. Roger that. We'll continue to monitor the situation. Thunder Mountain out. Kai replaces the handset, his expression troubled. They think we're seeing bears or something. Better than nothing, I say. At least they're warned that something's out there. We return to the window. The creatures haven't moved, maintaining their semicircle at the forest's edge. Their stillness is unnerving. No shifting of weight, no turning of heads. Just an absolute predatory focus on the station. What are they waiting for? Lachlan wonders aloud. As if in answer, one of the creatures takes a single step forward, then another. Slowly, with deliberate grace, it begins to cross the clearing toward the station. The others remain in place, watching. It's testing us, Kai says, seeing if we'll run or fight. I raise the shotgun, aiming through the window at the approaching figure. Should I take the shot? Kai hesitates. It might not do any good. Blackwood's knife didn't hurt them. It's worth a try, Lachlan argues. What have we got to lose? The creature continues its approach, now halfway across the clearing. Its movement is smooth, almost liquid, its form seeming to blur at the edges in a way that makes my eyes hurt to focus on. I'm taking the shot, I decide, steadying the shotgun against the windowsill. I aim for the center mass, where a heart would be in a normal creature, and squeeze the trigger. The shotgun's report is deafening in the confined space of the station. Outside, buckshot tears into the advancing creature, causing it to stagger momentarily. Black ichor sprays from multiple impact points in its chest and abdomen. For a moment, I think the shot has been effective. Then, with that same deliberate slowness, the creature straightens. The wounds close before our eyes, the ichor seeming to flow back into its body. It resumes its advance as if nothing had happened. Try again, Lachlan urges, his voice tight with fear. I pump the shotgun, chambering another round, and fire again. This time I aim for the skull head, hoping to destroy what might be the creature's brain. The shot connects, chipping away fragments of bone from the deer skull. The creature pauses, reaching up with one elongated hand to touch the damaged skull. Then it continues forward, now only 20 yards from the station. Behind it, the other creatures begin to advance as well, spreading out to approach from different angles. This isn't working, I say, lowering the shotgun. We need another plan. Kai has been flipping frantically through Blackwood's journal. Listen to this, he says, finding a passage near the middle. The elder insisted that the Manitou could be forced back to their own realm through a ritual of cleansing and banishment. Sacred herbs burned at the cardinal points, obsidian placed at each corner of the protected space, silver to bind the spell. A ritual? Lachlan repeats incredulously. That's your plan? Do you have a better one? Kai challenges. The shotgun isn't working. The knife didn't work. What else can we try? Lachlan falls silent, acknowledging the point. I check my watch, 2:30 p.m. Still at least half an hour until help arrives, and the creatures are closing in. What do we need for this ritual? I ask Kai. We have the herbs, sage and cedar, he says, pulling the pouches from his pocket. We have the obsidian stones and your silver pendant. The journal mentions the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. We need to place the obsidian at those points around the station, burn the herbs, and, he hesitates, one of us has to recite the binding words. What binding words? Lachlan demands. Kai points to a passage in the journal written in a language I don't recognize. It's Kootenai, I think. My grandmother taught me some when I was young. I might be able to pronounce it correctly enough. It's a desperate plan, based on writings from a century-old journal and beliefs that most modern people would dismiss as superstition. But faced with creatures that shouldn't exist, hunting us with impossible abilities, I'm willing to try anything. Let's do it, I decide. What's first? Kai divides the herbs and obsidian stones between us. We need to place these at the 4 cardinal points around the station. That means going outside. The creatures are closer now, the lead one only about 15 yards from the front door. The others have spread out, approaching from different directions. We'll have to be fast, I say, checking the shotgun again. I'll go first. Try to distract them. You two place the stones and herbs, then get back inside. Too dangerous, Kai objects. We should stick together. We don't have time to argue, I insist. This is our best chance. Before they can protest further, I move to the door, shotgun raised. Be ready, I tell them. When I start firing, go out the back way and circle around. Place the stones as quickly as you can. They nod reluctantly, positioning themselves by the rear door. I take a deep breath, steadying my nerves, then pull open the front door and step onto the small porch. The lead creature stops its advance, skull head tilting as if curious about my sudden appearance. The others pause as well, their attention fixing on me with predatory intensity. I raise the shotgun and fire at the nearest creature, aiming for its legs this time. The buckshot tears into its lower limbs, causing it to stumble. It doesn't stop the creature, but the momentary distraction is all we need. Now! I shout, pumping the shotgun and firing again at a different target. From my peripheral vision, I see Kai and Lachlan slip out the back door, each carrying their share of the ritual materials. I continue firing, moving down the porch steps to draw the creature's attention further from my friends. The creatures respond to my aggression, all 5 now focusing on me. They advance with increased speed, that fluid movement that's neither fully human nor animal. I back away, maintaining distance while continuing to fire. Each shot slows them momentarily but does no lasting damage. Through gaps between the approaching creatures, I glimpse Kai placing an obsidian stone at what must be the eastern corner of the station's perimeter, quickly lighting the herbs with his lighter. Lachlan is doing the same at the southern point. They're moving swiftly, understanding the urgency. My shotgun clicks empty after the 6th shot. I have no time to reload. The lead creature is too close. I reverse my grip using the weapon as a club and swing it hard at the skull head. The impact produces a dull crack and fragments of bone scatter. The creature recoils, giving me a precious moment to retreat a few more steps. Hurry! I call to my friends, who are now placing the 3rd set of stones and herbs at the western corner. The creatures seem to realize what we're attempting. 2 break off from pursuing me and turn toward Kai and Lachlan. I drop the shotgun and draw Blackwood's knife from my belt, rushing toward the nearest creature with a yell designed to recapture their attention. The silver blade slices into the back of the creature as it moves toward my friends. Unlike before, the wound doesn't immediately close. A thin line of black ichor continues to seep from the cut. The creature whirls to face me, emitting that terrible screech we heard at the tower. The knife works now, I shout, backing away as the creature advances on me. Something's different. Kai and Lachlan have reached the northern corner, completing the ritual perimeter. Kai lights the final bundle of herbs, then holds up the wooden fetish figure. He begins to chant in what must be the Kootenai language, his voice gaining strength and confidence with each unfamiliar word. The effect is immediate and startling. The creatures freeze in their pursuit, skull heads swiveling toward Kai. A visible tremor passes through their forms like ripples on water. The one I wounded with the knife seems to flicker, its outline becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. It's working, Lachlan cries, hope kindling in his voice for the first time in days. Kai continues the chant, the wooden figure held high. I notice the silver pendant around my neck has begun to warm against my skin, not uncomfortably but noticeably. A faint glow emanates from it, visible even in the daylight. The creatures begin to retreat, moving backward toward the forest's edge. Their movements are jerky now, lacking the fluid grace they displayed before. One stumbles, falling to all fours in a position that looks painfully unnatural. I advance cautiously, the knife still gripped in my hand. The wounded creature hisses at my approach, but retreats rather than attacking. The black ichor from its wound leaves a trail on the ground, sizzling slightly where it touches the earth. Kai's chant reaches a crescendo, his voice ringing out across the clearing. At the 4 corners of the station, the burning herbs produce smoke that seems to defy the natural movement of air, forming a barrier that's not quite visible but somehow perceptible. The creatures reach the tree line and pause there, skull heads lowered as if in defeat. Then, with a synchronicity that remains disturbing despite their retreat, they turn and melt into the forest, disappearing from view. Silence falls over the clearing. The unnatural stillness that preceded their arrival has broken. I can hear birds resuming their calls in the distance, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The pressure that weighed on the air has lifted. Did we do it? Lachlan asks cautiously. Are they gone? Kai lowers the wooden figure, his expression cautious. I don't know. The ritual was supposed to force them back to their own realm, but you're not sure if you did it right, I finish for him. He nods. The pronunciation, the intent, it all matters in these things according to my grandmother. And I'm not exactly a trained shaman. We stand at the edge of the clearing, alert for any sign of the creature's return. Minutes pass with no movement from the forest. We should get back inside, I suggest finally. Maintain the perimeter, just in case. Help should be here soon. We return to the ranger station, each of us looking over our shoulders repeatedly. Inside, Kai replaces the wooden fetish and remaining herbs in the pouch, keeping them close at hand. I check the shotgun, reloading it from the box of shells despite its apparent ineffectiveness against the creatures. What time is it? Lachlan asks. I check my watch. 2:50. The rescue team should be here in about 10 minutes, if they're on schedule. And if those things come back, he presses. We do the ritual again, Kai says firmly. It worked once, it should work again. I'm not entirely convinced, but I nod agreement. Having some plan, some means of fighting back, is better than feeling helpless in the face of the unknown. Lachlan moves to the radio, checking in with the dispatcher to confirm the rescue team's approach. The response is reassuring. They're on schedule, now just minutes away. At the window, I continue to watch the forest edge, the knife still gripped tightly in my hand. The wound I inflicted on the creature hadn't healed immediately like before. Something had changed. Either the ritual's effect or perhaps the fact that all of us were fighting back rather than running. Blackwood's final journal entry comes back to me. They cannot be escaped, only confronted. Perhaps that was the key all along. Not the silver or obsidian alone, but the act of standing ground, of facing fear directly rather than fleeing from it. A sound from the direction of the dirt road draws my attention, the rumble of engines approaching. Moments later, 2 Forest Service vehicles appear, rugged SUVs with official markings. 4 rangers emerge, equipped with rifles and radios. The rescue team, I say, relief washing through me. We made it. We exit the station to meet them, explaining our situation as best we can without sounding completely insane. We describe getting lost after leaving the trail, spending nights in the wilderness, and encountering what we carefully refer to as aggressive wildlife that we couldn't identify. The rangers are professional and efficient, more concerned with our physical well-being than the details of our ordeal. They perform quick medical checks, noting Lachlan's sprained ankle and our various cuts and bruises. One ranger radios for a medical evacuation for Lachlan, while the others prepare to escort Kai and me by vehicle. As we gather our remaining gear and prepare to leave, I find myself drawn to the edge of the clearing, looking back toward the forest where the creatures disappeared. Despite our apparent victory, I can't shake the feeling that it's not truly over, that the shadows of Manitou Lake will remain, waiting for the next unwary travelers to stumble into their domain. Kai joins me, following my gaze to the tree line. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asks quietly. "They're still out there." I nod. "We forced them back, but I don't think we destroyed them." "Maybe no one can," he suggests. "Maybe they're as much a part of this wilderness as the trees and rocks." A ranger calls to us, indicating it's time to leave. With a final glance at the forest, we turn away, moving toward the vehicles and the promise of safety beyond. As I climb into the SUV, I touch the silver pendant still hanging around my neck. I'll keep it, I decide. A reminder of what we faced and survived. And perhaps, if the need ever arises, a weapon against the darkness that lurks in the remote places of the world. The rangers drive us away from Thunder Mountain, following the dirt road that eventually connects to a larger Forest Service road. With each mile that passes, the weight of our experience seems to lighten slightly. By the time we reach the nearest town 3 hours later, the horrors of Manitou Lake have begun to take on the quality of a nightmare. Vivid but somewhat distant. But that night, in the safety of a motel room, I dream of deer skull heads and silent forests, of voices calling from the darkness and shapes that blur the boundary between human and animal. I wake in a cold sweat, the silver pendant clutched tightly in my hand. Some experiences mark you forever. Some fears embed themselves too deeply to ever fully fade. And some places, like Manitou Lake, should be left to their ancient guardians undisturbed by human intrusion. The Skinwalkers or Manitou, or whatever name best fits the creatures we encountered, will continue their eternal vigil, and I will carry the knowledge of their existence with me always. A burden, yes, but also a strange gift. I have glimpsed beyond the veil of the ordinary world and survived to tell the tale. Though I suspect few would believe it, 6 months have passed since our escape from Manitou Lake. Winter has settled over the land, blanketing the mountains in snow and ice. The wilderness we fled has transformed, its dangers hidden beneath pristine whiteness. Dormant perhaps, but not gone. I've tried to resume my normal life. I go to work, see friends, engage in the mundane routines that once seemed so important. But something fundamental has changed within me. Having faced the impossible, the boundaries I once accepted as fixed have become fluid, uncertain. Lachlan returned to Australia after his ankle healed, eager to put as much distance as possible between himself and the American wilderness. We stay in touch through occasional text messages, but neither of us references what happened directly. Some experiences are too strange, too personal to be reduced to casual conversation. Kai has gone in the opposite direction. Our shared ordeal awakened something in him, a connection to his Kootenai heritage that had lain dormant for most of his life. He spent the past months researching Native American folklore, particularly stories of skinwalkers and similar entities across different tribal traditions. We talk frequently, comparing notes on his discoveries. They're known by different names, he told me during one late-night call. But the core elements remain consistent, humans transformed into something other, existing in the boundary between our world and the spirit realm, always associated with isolated places, always hunting those who intrude on their territory. "Have you found any accounts of people who successfully fought them off?" I asked. "A few," he admitted. "Most involve rituals similar to what we attempted. Some mention silver or obsidian weapons, But the most important factor seems to be confronting them directly, facing the fear they generate rather than succumbing to it. This aligned with my own interpretation of our experience. The creatures, whatever they truly were, fed on fear, isolation, despair. When we finally stood our ground together, something had changed in the dynamic between hunter and hunted. The silver pendant remains with me always, hanging around my neck beneath my clothes. I've had dreams, vivid, unsettling visions that feel more like memories or premonitions than ordinary nightmares. In them, I stand at the shore of Manitou Lake under a full moon, watching as shapes emerge from the dark water. They call to me, using voices I know, inviting me to join them beneath the surface. I always wake before I answer. Tonight marks exactly 6 months since our rescue from Thunder Mountain. Outside my apartment window, snow falls in thick, silent flakes, accumulating on the sill. I sit at my desk, Blackwood's journal open before me. I've read it countless times, searching for insights we might have missed, clues to the true nature of what we encountered. My phone vibrates with an incoming call. Kai. I answer, somehow unsurprised by his timing. You feel it too, don't you? He asks without preamble. The connection is still there. Yes, I admit. I've been thinking about it all day. I found something, he continues. A reference in an old Kootenai text my grandmother had. It talks about the binding between those who've encountered the Manitou and the creatures themselves. It doesn't end with escape. It's a permanent link, like a thread connecting predator and prey across any distance. A chill runs through me, not entirely from fear. On some level, I've known this all along. What does that mean for us? It means they can find us, Kai says bluntly. And I think they're trying to. The dreams, you've been having them too, haven't you? Standing by the lake, the voices calling. Yes. There's no point denying it. What do we do? Kai is silent for a moment. We have 2 choices, he finally says. We can try to sever the connection completely through a more powerful ritual, one that might permanently banish them from our realm of experience. Or, I prompt when he hesitates, or we go back. We finish what we started. We find a way to destroy them. The suggestion should sound insane. Returning voluntarily to the place that nearly killed us, to face creatures that defied conventional understanding of what's possible. Yet something within me responds to the idea, a recognition that our story with Manitou Lake is indeed unfinished. When? I ask. The decision made in that single word? Spring, Kai says. When the mountain passes clear, we'll need to prepare properly this time, gather the right materials, study the rituals more carefully, and we'll need help. Lachlan won't come back, I point out. Not him. I've been in contact with someone from my grandmother's tribe, an elder who knows the old ways. He's willing to guide us, to teach us what we need to know. The prospect of returning to those dark woods should terrify me. Instead, I feel a strange clarity, as if a path that was always meant for me has finally revealed itself. I'll be ready, I promise. After we hang up, I return to Blackwood's journal, turning to the final page. Below his last written entry is something I discovered only weeks after our return. A crude map, drawn in fading ink, showing Manitou Lake and its surroundings. At the center of the lake, Blackwood had marked an X with a single word beside it. Source. What that means, I'm not certain, but I suspect we'll discover its significance when we return. The creatures of Manitou Lake have not finished with us, nor we with them. The confrontation has merely been postponed. Outside, the snow continues to fall, muffling the sounds of the city. In that hushed stillness, I imagine I can hear whispers, voices calling my name from a great distance, beckoning me back to the wilderness where reality itself grows thin. Spring will come, the mountains will thaw, and I will answer that call, armed with new knowledge and purpose. Whatever awaits us at Manitou Lake, be it salvation or destruction, at least the uncertainty will end. I close the journal and move to the window, watching the snow transform the familiar landscape into something alien and pristine. Somewhere far to the west, in a remote valley few have ever visited, a dark lake lies frozen beneath winter's grip. But beneath that ice, something stirs, patient and ancient, waiting for our return. I touch the silver pendant through my shirt, drawing comfort from its solid presence. We're coming, I whisper to the night. This time, we'll be ready. The snow swirls in response, forming patterns that seem almost deliberate before dissolving back into chaos. And somewhere in that brief configuration, I imagine I glimpse the outline of a skull-headed figure, watching me from across the miles. The final confrontation awaits, when winter releases its hold on the mountains. Until then, I will prepare, gathering strength and knowledge for the reckoning to come. For the shadows of Manitou Lake are patient, and they have marked us as their own. My name is Elijah Swan, and this happened to me in the fall of 2014. I'm telling you this story now because I need someone else to know, in case they come back for me. In case I disappear like the others. I was 27 then, living what most people would call an ordinary life. I'd moved to Chicago 3 years earlier for an accounting job at a mid-sized firm downtown. The work paid well enough for a decent apartment in Lincoln Park, walking distance to the lake. My real passion, though, was photography. Every weekend I'd escape the fluorescent-lit cubicle world with my camera, hunting for shots that captured the city's hidden character. That October morning started like any other. The autumn air had that crisp bite that made everything feel more alive, more electric. I'd been planning this particular expedition for weeks, an abandoned textile warehouse on the south side that I'd discovered through an urban exploration forum. The building had been empty for over a decade, and the photos other explorers had posted showed beautiful decay, nature reclaiming industrial spaces, light streaming through broken windows onto rusted machinery. The drive took 40 minutes through increasingly desolate neighborhoods. Boarded-up storefronts gave way to empty lots studded with weeds. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had been cut open years ago. 3 stories of red brick and broken glass. It hulked against the gray sky like some sleeping beast. I parked across the street and spent a few minutes studying the building through my telephoto lens. No signs of life, no security cameras I could see. The front entrance was sealed with plywood, but I knew from the forum posts that there was access through a loading dock around back. The silence hit me first as I approached the building. Chicago's never truly quiet. There's always traffic, sirens, the hum of civilization. But here the usual urban soundtrack seemed muffled, as if the empty buildings were absorbing sound. My footsteps on the cracked asphalt echoed too loudly in the stillness. The loading dock door hung partially open, revealing a rectangle of darkness. I clicked on my flashlight and squeezed through the gap. The beam cut through air thick with dust and decay, revealing a vast space filled with the skeletons of old machinery. The smell was overwhelming, rust, mold, and something else underneath. Something organic and wrong. For the first hour, everything went perfectly. The photographs were even better than I'd hoped. Sunlight pierced the gloom through broken skylights, illuminating scenes of beautiful destruction. Vines crept through cracks in the walls. Pigeons had built nests in the rafters, their droppings creating abstract patterns on the floor below. I was adjusting my camera settings in what had once been the main production floor when I heard it. A soft scraping sound from somewhere above. I froze, listening. Urban explorers learn to distinguish between the sounds of a building settling and the sounds of something that doesn't belong. This was the latter. Scrape, pause, scrape. It came again, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy across a floor. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Could be another explorer. Could be a homeless person who'd found shelter here. Nothing necessarily threatening. I decided to investigate. The stairwell to the second floor was dark, my flashlight beam seeming pathetically small in the vast space. Each step up the metal stairs rang out like a gunshot. The scraping had stopped. The second floor was divided into smaller spaces, offices and storage rooms. Most doors hung open, revealing empty rectangles of darkness, but one door at the far end of the hallway was closed. Fresh scratches marred the wood around the handle. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, walk out, and never come back. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and I was already addicted. I approached the door slowly, camera ready. The handle turned easily, too easily, as if it had been recently oiled. The room beyond was different from the rest of the building, while everywhere else showed years of neglect and decay. This space had been maintained. The floor was clean. Furniture, a desk, a filing cabinet, several chairs, sat arranged as if someone had just stepped out for coffee. But it was the wall opposite the door that made my blood turn to ice water. Photographs, dozens of them, maybe 100. All Polaroids, all pinned to the wall with pushpins overlapping like scales on some monstrous fish. At first glance, they looked like portraits, head and shoulder shots of different people, men and women, young and old. But there was uniformity to them that made my skin crawl. Every subject had the same expression, wide eyes, mouth open, the universal look of terror. I stepped closer, despite every fiber of my being telling me to run. The photos were dated, written in block letters at the bottom of each one. The earliest I could see was from 2009. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks ago, October 15th, 2014. Today was October 29th. My hands shook as I raised my camera to document what I was seeing. Through the viewfinder, the wall of photographs looked even more sinister. The subjects seemed to be staring directly at me, their terror frozen for eternity. I snapped shot after shot, the flash illuminating the room in stark, clinical white. That's when I noticed the pattern. While the poses were similar, the backgrounds varied. Some photos showed concrete walls, others wood paneling. A few showed what looked like basement stones. These people hadn't been photographed in the same place. They'd been collected. The scraping sound returned, directly above my head now. Someone was in the room above me. Someone who had heard my camera's flash going off. Someone who knew I was here. I moved to the window and looked out at the street. My car was still there, but now there was another vehicle parked behind it. A white van with no windows in the back. The kind of vehicle you'd use to transport things you didn't want people to see. The scraping stopped. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above, heading toward what I assumed was another stairwell. I had minutes, maybe less, before whoever was up there made it down to my level. I looked around the room frantically, searching for another exit. There was a second door in the far corner that I hadn't noticed before. I tried the handle, locked. The footsteps were on the stairs now. Heavy boots on metal steps, taking their time. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. They knew I couldn't get out the way I'd come in. I threw my weight against the locked door. Old wood, old lock. It gave way on the second try, and I tumbled into a narrow hallway that ran along the back of the building. Emergency exit signs glowed green in the darkness. I ran toward them, my camera bag bouncing against my hip. Behind me I heard the office door slam open. A voice called out. Male, gravelly, angry. Hey! Hey! I hit the emergency exit at full speed. The door flew open, and I burst into the afternoon sunlight. The back of the building faced an alley, and I could see the street beyond. I ran toward it, not looking back. My car started on the first try, which felt like a miracle. I reversed away from the van, swung around in a tight U-turn, and floored it toward the main road. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure emerge from the building, tall, wearing dark clothes too far away to make out features. He stood there watching as I drove away. He didn't chase me. He didn't need to. He knew who I was now. I drove in circles for an hour before I trusted myself to go home. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every few minutes I'd check my mirrors to make sure no one was following me. The images on my camera seemed to burn through the memory card, demanding attention I wasn't ready to give them. Back in my apartment, I triple-checked the locks and drew all the curtains before uploading the photos to my computer. On the larger screen, the wall of Polaroids looked even more horrifying. I could make out details I'd missed in person, the way some subjects had bruises around their wrists, suggesting restraints. The fact that many were wearing the same clothes they'd probably been abducted in. Work uniforms, casual wear, exercise gear. These weren't professional photographs. They were trophies. I spent the next 3 hours researching missing persons reports in the Chicago area. It didn't take long to find matches. Sarah Chen reported missing August 12, 2014. Marcus Williams vanished while jogging in Lincoln Park on September 3rd. Jennifer Morrison, last seen leaving her job at a downtown law firm on October 1st. All of them were on the wall. The most recent photo, dated October 15th, showed a young woman with short blonde hair and a distinctive tattoo of a vine around her wrist. I found her missing person report within minutes. Rebecca Torres, age 24, a graduate student at Northwestern. She disappeared after leaving her apartment to meet friends for dinner. She never arrived. I should have called the police immediately. That's what any rational person would have done. But I kept thinking about the man in the building, how calmly he'd watched me drive away. Like he wasn't worried, like he knew something I didn't. Instead, I decided to do more research. The warehouse was owned by Meridian Holdings, a shell company that led to another shell company, which led to a third. Standard practice for real estate speculation, but it also made it impossible to trace the actual owner. The building had been empty since 2003 when the textile company that operated there went bankrupt. I found the Urban Exploration Forum where I'd first learned about the place. The thread was still active, with posts as recent as last month. But now, reading more carefully, I noticed a pattern. Several explorers mentioned seeing lights in the building at night. Others reported fresh tire tracks in the parking area. One poster, username Urban Phantom, had written, "Place gives me the creeps. Feels like someone's watching. Won't be going back." That post was dated 6 months ago. Urban Phantom hadn't posted anything since. I was deep in my research when my phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. Hello? I answered. Silence. Then, "You took something that doesn't belong to you." The voice was calm, almost conversational. The same gravelly tone I'd heard shouting at me in the warehouse. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, though my mouth had gone completely dry. "The photographs, Elijah. You took photographs of my wall." He knew my name. How did he know my name? "That's a crime scene," I managed to say. "Those people are missing. I'm calling the police." A low chuckle. "No, you're not, because if you do, Rebecca Torres dies tonight instead of next week, and it'll be your fault." Rebecca Torres, the blonde girl from the most recent photo. "She's still alive?" I whispered. "For now. But that could change very quickly if you do something stupid, like calling the police." "What do you want?" "Meet me tomorrow night. Millennium Park near the Bean, 10 o'clock. Come alone and bring your camera. We need to have a conversation about your photography." The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone for a long time. He had Rebecca Torres. Maybe others. The police were an option, but what if he was telling the truth? What if calling them got her killed? I looked at my computer screen, at the wall of terrified faces staring back at me. How many of them had died because someone else hesitated? How many could have been saved if someone had acted faster? But then I thought about Rebecca Torres, somewhere in the dark, waiting for rescue that might never come. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the building made me jump. Footsteps in the hallway, pipes settling, the elevator's mechanical hum. I kept the lights on and stayed away from the windows. Somewhere out there, he was watching, planning, adding another photograph to his collection. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't concentrate on spreadsheets when I knew what I knew. Instead, I spent the day preparing. I researched everything I could about the area around Millennium Park, looking for escape routes and places where backup could be positioned. I charged my phone and my camera batteries. I wrote a detailed account of everything that had happened and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the FBI's Chicago field office. If I didn't come back from the meeting, at least someone would know the truth. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to eat lunch but couldn't keep it down. I tried to read, to watch TV, to do anything that might distract me from the ticking clock. Nothing worked. The photographs seemed burned into my retinas. All those faces, all that terror. At 8 o'clock, I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my camera bag, checked that the pepper spray I'd bought was easily accessible, and headed for the door. The envelope went into my mailbox, addressed to the FBI. If I wasn't back by morning, my neighbor would hear the mail truck and wonder why I hadn't picked up my mail in 2 days. Eventually, someone would find it. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. The drive to Millennium Park felt like driving to my own execution. Chicago's evening traffic moved with its usual sluggish persistence, unaware that somewhere in the city people were being held prisoner by a man who collected their terror like other people collected stamps. I parked in the underground garage and took the stairs up to street level. Millennium Park after dark was a different creature than during the day. Shadows gathered in the spaces between streetlights. The Cloudgate sculpture, the Bean, reflected the city lights in warped funhouse distortions. At 9:45, I positioned myself near the sculpture and waited. A few late tourists wandered around taking selfies, but the park was mostly empty. The October wind cut through my jacket, and I pulled it tighter around myself. At exactly 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Behind you." I turned around slowly. A man stood about 20 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching me with the patient attention of a predator. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with a shaved head and the kind of build that suggested either military service or serious time in a gym. Most disturbing were his eyes, pale blue and completely emotionless, like looking into a frozen lake. "Elijah Swan," he said, approaching at a leisurely pace. "You're exactly what I expected. Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's Rebecca Torres?" He smiled, and it was like watching a skull grin. "Safe, for now. But we need to discuss your little photography expedition yesterday. Those people are missing. Their families are looking for them. The police," he interrupted, "are remarkably ineffective at finding people who don't want to be found, and remarkably easy to misdirect when necessary." He was close enough now that I could see the scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. It looked old. Professionally done. "You're going to delete those photographs," he continued, "and you're going to forget you ever saw that room. In exchange, Rebecca Torres goes free tomorrow night. Anonymous tip to the police about where to find her. What about the others? His smile widened. What others? The people in the other photographs. The ones you've already killed. I think you're confused, he said calmly. I don't kill anyone. I'm simply a custodian of a collection that has significant personal value to someone who prefers to remain anonymous. A custodian? That's correct. I maintain the archive, ensure its security, and occasionally need to handle situations like this one. A couple walked past us, talking and laughing, completely oblivious to the nightmare happening 10 feet away. I thought about screaming, about making a scene that would force them to notice. But then I thought about Rebecca Torres, somewhere in the dark. Prove she's alive, I said. He pulled out a phone and showed me a photo. Rebecca Torres, tied to a chair in what looked like a basement. She was conscious, looking directly at the camera. The phone's timestamp showed it had been taken 2 hours ago. Satisfied? I stared at the image, memorizing every detail. Concrete block walls. A small window near the ceiling, some kind of industrial equipment in the background. Delete your photographs, he said. Now, I pulled out my camera and turned it on. The display showed the images from yesterday, the wall of terror, frozen in digital memory. My finger hovered over the delete button. All of them, he said. And I want to see you do it. I deleted the first image, then the second. One by one, I erased the evidence of what I'd found. With each deletion, I felt like I was betraying the people on that wall, like I was making their disappearances easier. Your computer too, he said when I'd finished. The files you uploaded yesterday. Of course he knew about those. He'd probably been watching my apartment, seen the glow of my screen through the curtains. I'll need to go home too. No. He held up his phone again. This time the image showed Rebecca Torres, but now there was a knife pressed against her throat. You'll do it now. Remote access. I know you accountants are very thorough about backing up your data. My hands shook as I connected my phone to my computer remotely and deleted the uploaded files. Every photograph, every piece of evidence, gone. Good, he said, pocketing his phone. Now Rebecca Torres will be released tomorrow night at exactly 11 o'clock, Millennium Park right here. If you involve the police, if you tell anyone about this conversation, if you so much as drive past that warehouse again, she dies, and then I'll come for you. He turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. One more thing, Elijah. That camera of yours has GPS, doesn't it? Most of them do these days, which means I know exactly where you've been, when you were there, and how long you stayed. I know your patterns, your routines, the coffee shop you visit every Tuesday morning, the grocery store where you shop on Sundays, the little park where you like to take pictures of the lake. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just followed me to the warehouse. He'd been tracking me for who knows how long. Sleep well, he said, and melted into the shadows between the streetlights. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where he'd vanished. Around me, Chicago continued its normal evening rhythm, unaware that monsters walked among them. That somewhere in the city, people were being held prisoner by someone who collected their terror like fine art. I thought about Rebecca Torres, about the knife at her throat, about the promise he'd made. One more day, and she'd be free. All I had to do was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about the other faces on that wall. The older photographs, the ones from years past. How many people had been promised their freedom in exchange for someone else's silence? How many of them were still alive? I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner on the north side and sat in a corner booth, nursing coffee and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The fluorescent lights were too bright, casting harsh shadows that reminded me of camera flashes. Every time someone walked through the door, I looked up, expecting to see the pale blue eyes of the man from the park. He'd been watching me. For how long? Days? Weeks? The thought that my every movement had been catalogued, that my routines had been studied like those of a lab rat, made my skin crawl. I thought about all the times I'd felt like someone was watching me, dismissed as paranoia. Maybe it hadn't been paranoia at all. At 3 in the morning, I finally worked up the courage to return to my apartment. I took a circuitous route, checking my mirrors constantly, parking 2 blocks away and walking through alleys I'd never used before. The building seemed to loom larger in the darkness, every window a potential hiding spot for observers. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it, but everything felt different now. Contaminated. I checked every room, every closet, looking for signs that someone had been there. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean anything. A professional wouldn't leave obvious signs. I pulled all the curtains shut and turned off every light except for a small lamp in the corner. Then I sat on my couch with my laptop and started researching missing persons cases again, but more carefully this time. looking for patterns beyond the obvious. It didn't take long to find them. The disappearances clustered around specific neighborhoods. Lincoln Park, where I lived. River North. The Gold Coast. All areas where young professionals lived and worked. All places where someone with money would go hunting for specific types of victims. More disturbing was the timeline. The earliest case I could find that matched the pattern was from 2006. A photographer named David Kim who'd been documenting abandoned buildings on the south side. He'd posted about exploring an old warehouse on an urban exploration forum, then never posted again. His disappearance had been investigated, but no evidence was ever found. The warehouse. It had to be the same one. I spent the rest of the night mapping out every case I could find, creating a timeline that stretched back nearly a decade. 37 people, all missing, all fitting a similar profile. Young, educated, creative types who lived alone and had irregular schedules that made their disappearances less immediately obvious. As dawn broke over Chicago, I realized I was looking at the work of multiple people. The scope was too large, too organized for a single killer. This was a network, an organization with resources and planning capabilities that stretched back years. And somehow, I'd stumbled into the middle of it. My phone rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Unknown number. "Good morning, Elijah," said the familiar gravelly voice. "I trust you slept well." I looked around my apartment instinctively, though the curtains were still drawn. "How did you know you didn't go home until 3? That you've been researching missing persons all night? That you're currently sitting on your couch wearing yesterday's clothes and drinking your 4th cup of coffee?" My blood turned to ice. He could see me. Somehow, he could see me right now. "Where are you?" I whispered. "I'm everywhere, Elijah." That's the beauty of modern technology. Cameras are remarkably small these days, and remarkably easy to install when you have the right skills and sufficient motivation. I stood up slowly, scanning the room for anything that might be a hidden camera. The smoke detector, the cable box, the laptop itself. "Don't bother looking," he said with amusement. "You'll never find them all, and even if you did, I have other ways of keeping track of you." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that last night wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Rebecca Torres goes free tonight, as promised, but only if you follow the rules. No police, no more research, no more amateur detective work." I thought about the timeline I'd just created, the pattern of disappearances stretching back nearly a decade. How many of you are there? That's not your concern. Those people have families, people who love them, people who are still looking for them, and those people will continue looking, unsuccessfully, until they eventually give up and move on with their lives. It's the natural cycle of grief, Elijah. Very predictable. The casual way he discussed it, like he was talking about weather patterns, made my stomach turn. "You're insane." "I'm practical. There's a market for what we provide, and we provide it efficiently and discreetly. Think of us as specialists in customer service. Customer service. Our clients have very specific needs, and traditional avenues for meeting those needs are problematic. Legal complications, moral constraints, social judgments. We eliminate those complications." I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole into a world I'd never imagined existed. What kind of clients? The kind with enough money to indulge their particular interests without interference. The kind who value privacy above all else. The kind who understand that certain experiences are worth paying premium prices for. The implications hit me like a freight train. The photographs weren't just trophies, they were advertisements, catalogs, proof of inventory for buyers who wanted to purchase something that couldn't be found in any legitimate market. "You're selling them," I said. "I'm facilitating transactions between consenting adults." Consenting? Those people were kidnapped. The client's consent, Elijah. That's all that matters from a business perspective. I thought I was going to be sick. The room started spinning, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. "Tonight," he continued, his voice as calm as if he was discussing dinner plans, "Rebecca Torres will be released at Millennium Park at 11 o'clock. You'll be there to witness it, to confirm that I keep my promises. After that, you'll forget this entire episode ever happened. You'll go back to your accounting job and your weekend photography hobby, and you'll never again visit any building that doesn't appear on a legitimate tourist map. And if I don't, then Rebecca Torres becomes a permanent addition to someone's private collection, along with several other recent acquisitions who are currently enjoying our hospitality." Several others. He wasn't just holding Rebecca. There were more. "How many?" I asked. "That information is proprietary, but I will say that our current inventory levels are quite robust. Holiday season is always our busiest time. People have such specific desires when it comes to gift giving." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room and smash it against the wall. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. "I'll be there tonight," I said. "I know you will." "And Elijah? Bring your camera. I want you to document Rebecca's release. Think of it as a graduation present, the last photographs you'll ever take that involve our organization." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone. Outside, Chicago was waking up. People heading to work, starting their normal days, completely unaware that there were predators moving among them with industrial efficiency. I thought about calling the FBI, about calling the Chicago PD, about calling anyone who might be able to help. But then I thought about Rebecca Torres, and about the several other recent acquisitions he'd mentioned. How many people would die if I broke the rules? How many were dying anyway? I spent the day in a haze of preparation and dread. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, as if scrubbing the surfaces could somehow remove the contamination of what I'd learned. I organized my files, paid my bills, wrote a letter to my parents that I hoped they'd never have to read, because I was starting to understand that tonight's meeting wasn't really about Rebecca Torres. It was about me. They'd invested too much in monitoring me, learned too much about my routines and habits, to simply let me walk away. People who operated with the kind of resources and planning I'd witnessed didn't leave loose ends. They tied them up permanently. At 6 o'clock, I made one last decision. I called my office and left a message saying I was taking a leave of absence for family reasons. I packed a small bag with essential items, cash I'd withdrawn from several ATMs, a prepaid phone I'd bought at a convenience store, changes of clothes. I wrote detailed notes about everything I'd discovered and sealed them in an envelope addressed to my sister in Seattle. If they were planning to tie up loose ends, I was going to make it as difficult as possible. The sun was setting when I left my apartment for what I suspected might be the last time. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, exited through the basement garage, and walked 6 blocks before getting into my car. As I drove toward downtown, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded like livestock toward a slaughter. Every turn I made seemed expected, every route anticipated. They weren't just watching me, they were guiding me. But I had one advantage they might not have considered. I knew they were watching. Millennium Park at night had become my personal version of hell. As I approached the bean for the second time in 24 hours, every shadow seemed to hide observers. Every reflection in the sculpture's surface might be showing me someone who didn't belong. I arrived 45 minutes early and positioned myself where I could see multiple approach routes. The park was busier than it had been the night before. Couples on evening walks, joggers following the lakefront trail, a few die-hard tourists still taking pictures despite the gathering darkness. Any one of them could be working with him. I'd spent the afternoon studying surveillance techniques online, learning about how professional watchers operated. They used teams, multiple observers who could hand off surveillance duties, rotate positions, become invisible by being unremarkable. The jogger who passed by twice might not be exercising. The couple arguing near the fountain might be communicating through their apparent conflict. At 10:30 I spotted him. He approached from the north, walking with the same unhurried confidence he'd shown the night before. But this time I was looking for the things I'd missed before. The subtle gestures as he walked past certain people. The way a woman reading on a bench closed her book and stood up when he passed. The jogger who suddenly changed his route to circle behind me. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. "Punctual," he said when he reached me. "I appreciate that in people. Where is she?" Instead of answering, he gestured toward the bean. "Beautiful sculpture, isn't it? All those distorted reflections. You never quite see what you expect to see." I followed his gaze and saw what he meant. In the sculpture's surface, I could see myself and him standing together, but our images were warped and multiplied. I could also see the woman from the bench now standing about 50 feet away, the jogger who had stopped to stretch near a lamppost. At least 3 others I hadn't noticed before. "Your team," I said. "Associates. We all have roles to play. And what's my role?" He smiled that skull grin again. "You're the witness. The person who can testify that we keep our promises, that Rebecca Torres was released unharmed, exactly as agreed." A black SUV pulled up to the curb nearby. Through the tinted windows, I could see movement but couldn't make out details. "She's in there?" I asked. "She is. But before we proceed, I need you to understand something important. What happens next determines not just Rebecca's fate, but the fate of 7 other people currently in our care." 7 others. My heart sank. "The market has been particularly robust lately," he continued conversationally. "Holiday season, as I mentioned, but also some new clients with very specific requirements. Young professionals like yourself, people with creative hobbies. People who document their experiences. I felt the trap closing around me like a steel cage. You want me, I said. I want you to make an informed decision. Rebecca Torres goes free tonight, as promised. So do 3 others, recent acquisitions who haven't yet been allocated. But the remaining 4 have already been committed to clients. Their transactions are complete. Unless we can offer those clients something even more appealing, something unique. A photographer who has already seen our operation, who understands what we do, who could provide our clients with a very special kind of documentation service. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You want me to work for you. I want you to survive, Elijah, because the alternative is that you become inventory yourself. Tonight, along with Rebecca Torres and everyone else we're currently holding, I looked at the SUV imagining Rebecca tied up inside, probably terrified out of her mind. Then I thought about the 7 others he'd mentioned, 8 lives hanging in the balance, and all of them depending on my decision. What kind of documentation service, I asked. Our clients enjoy having professional quality photographs of their experiences, artistic compositions, technical excellence, the kind of work that elevates a simple transaction into something memorable. My stomach turned. He was talking about photographing torture, murder, things that would make the wall of Polaroids look like family snapshots. I need time to think about this. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have. The clients I mentioned are expecting delivery tonight. If we can't offer them an alternative arrangement, he let the sentence hang in the air like a blade. I looked around the park again. The woman from the bench was now closer, close enough that I could see the bulge under her jacket that suggested a concealed weapon. The jogger had been joined by another runner, and they were having a conversation that looked casual but felt anything but. How do I know you'll actually release them? I asked. Because failing to honor agreements is bad for business. Our reputation depends on reliability. He pulled out his phone and showed me another photograph. Rebecca Torres again, but this time she was standing, unbound, next to what looked like the same SUV that was parked nearby. The timestamp showed it had been taken 15 minutes ago. She's already been prepared for release, he said. All you have to do is say yes, and she walks free, along with the others. I stared at the image, trying to spot any sign that it was fake or manipulated, but it looked genuine. Rebecca was alive, unharmed, ready to go home. And if I say no, then you'll be in the same SUV within the next 60 seconds, and Rebecca Torres will wake up tomorrow in a very different kind of photograph. I could feel the weight of the decision crushing down on me. 8 lives versus my own moral compass. 8 people who would die if I made the wrong choice. But then I thought about something else. About all the people who had disappeared over the past decade. About David Kim, the photographer who had vanished in 2006. About the pattern of disappearances that stretched back years. How many other people had faced this same choice? How many had said yes, thinking they were saving lives, only to become part of the machine that destroyed them? I want to see her first, I said. Face to face. I want to confirm she's really okay. He studied me for a moment, then nodded to someone behind me. The SUV's engine started, and it pulled closer to where we were standing. The rear door opened, and Rebecca Torres stepped out. She was exactly as I'd seen her in the missing person reports. Blonde hair, vine tattoo around her wrist, early 20s, but she was moving strangely, like someone who was heavily sedated or in shock. Her eyes were unfocused, and she seemed to be having trouble staying upright. Rebecca? I called out. She turned toward my voice, and for a moment her eyes cleared. The terror I saw there was absolute and primal. She opened her mouth to speak, but only managed a whisper. Please. Then the woman from the bench was beside her, helping her back toward the SUV with what looked like gentle assistance but was clearly coercion. As you can see, he said, she's unharmed but understandably traumatized by her experience. A few days of rest and counseling, and she'll be fine. Unless, of course, you make a different choice. I watched Rebecca being guided back toward the vehicle and realized that this was my last chance. Once she was back inside, once I made my decision, there would be no changing my mind. I thought about my camera, about all the photographs I'd taken over the years. Urban exploration, street photography, portraits of friends. All of it had been preparation for this moment, when my ability to document the truth might be the only thing standing between innocent people and the darkness. 30 seconds, Elijah, he said quietly. The woman was opening the SUV door. Rebecca looked back at me one more time, and I saw something in her expression that looked like understanding. Like she knew what choice I was going to make. Like she was trying to tell me it was okay. I need one thing first, I said. You're not in a position to negotiate. Not a negotiation, a request. I want to take one photograph of you for my personal collection. He looked surprised for the first time since I'd met him. Why? Because if I'm going to work for you, I want to remember how this started. The moment when everything changed. He considered this for a moment, then nodded. One photograph. I raised my camera and adjusted the settings, taking my time to compose the shot. He stood patiently, that skull grin fixed on his face, confident that he'd won. Through the viewfinder, I could see him clearly. But I could also see the reflection in the beam behind him, all the other watchers, their positions, their faces, the SUV with Rebecca inside, the joggers who weren't really jogging, the woman who wasn't really reading. I adjusted the flash settings one more time, then took the picture. The flash was much brighter than it needed to be. Bright enough to temporarily blind anyone looking in our direction. Bright enough to cause confusion and chaos for the few seconds I would need. I was already running before he realized what had happened. The flash had done its job. In the seconds of blindness that followed, I sprinted toward the street, my camera bag bouncing against my hip. Behind me I could hear shouting, the sound of someone stumbling, the electronic chirp of phones being used to coordinate pursuit. I had maybe a 30-second head start, but I'd spent all day planning for this moment. Instead of heading for my car, which they'd certainly identified and were probably tracking, I ran toward the Red Line station. If I could make it to the underground before they reorganized, I might have a chance. The stairs leading down to the subway platform were crowded with evening commuters. I pushed through them, mumbling apologies, not daring to look back. The sound of a train approaching echoed up from below. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard the woman's voice behind me. "Security, stop that man." He grabbed my purse. Heads turned toward me. Several people moved to block my path, trying to be good Samaritans. I pushed past them more roughly, earning angry shouts and grabbing hands that tried to slow me down. The train was pulling into the station as I reached the platform. I squeezed through the doors just as they were closing, watching through the windows as the woman from the bench appeared at the top of the stairs, scanning the crowd. But I wasn't safe yet. They had resources, coordination, technology. The train would only take me so far before they figured out where I was going and cut me off. At the Roosevelt station, I got off and immediately boarded a southbound train on the Orange Line. From there to Midway, where I caught a bus heading west. Each transfer was carefully chosen to make tracking more difficult, to buy me time to think. By the time I reached the hotel I'd selected that afternoon, a cheap place near O'Hare that catered to flight crews and travelers with layovers, it was nearly 2 a.m. I paid cash for a room and immediately called the number I'd memorized for the FBI's Chicago field office. "This is Special Agent Martinez," a tired voice answered. "My name is Elijah Swan," I said. "I have information about multiple kidnappings and murders, and I have evidence." "Sir, if this is an emergency, you should call 911. "I have photographs," I interrupted, "of victims, and I know where they're being held." There was a pause. "Can you come to our office? They're watching me. They have people everywhere. But I can meet you somewhere public. Somewhere with lots of witnesses." We arranged to meet at Navy Pier at noon the next day. Agent Martinez would be wearing a blue Cubs jacket and carrying a newspaper. I would approach him with a specific phrase about the weather. After hanging up, I uploaded the photograph I'd taken in Millennium Park to every photo-sharing site I could think of. The image quality was exactly what I'd hoped for. The bright flash had illuminated not just the man with the pale blue eyes, but also the reflection in the beam showing all his associates. Their faces were clear, identifiable. I posted the images with detailed descriptions of what I'd witnessed, along with the locations and times. I uploaded them to Reddit, to urban exploration forums, to photography websites. Within hours, the images were being shared and discussed across social media. By morning, #ChicagoKidnappers was trending on Twitter. I spent the rest of the night writing everything down. Every detail I could remember about the warehouse, the photographs on the wall, the conversation with the man who claimed to be a custodian. I included everything I'd learned about the pattern of disappearances, the missing persons reports, the timeline that stretched back nearly a decade. At 8 a.m. I called the FBI office again. "Agent Martinez," the same voice answered. "This is Elijah Swan. We're supposed to meet at noon." "Mr. Swan, I'm afraid there's been a development. We received a call this morning from the Chicago PD. Rebecca Torres was found safe and unharmed in Lincoln Park at approximately 3 a.m. She's been taken to Northwestern Memorial for evaluation." My heart leaped. "She's alive?" "Yes, and apparently unharmed. She's told police that she was held for several days but released by her captors. She specifically mentioned that a photographer was instrumental in her release. What about the others? The man I spoke with said there were 7 others being held. We're investigating all possibilities. But Mr. Swan, I need to ask you something. Miss Torres also told police that her captors showed her photographs of the person who was helping them. They described you as someone who had joined their organization voluntarily. The room started spinning. That's not true. I was trying to help her. I'm sure there's an explanation, but right now, we need you to come in for questioning. There are some inconsistencies in the story that we need to resolve. Inconsistencies. They'd gotten to Rebecca somehow, convinced her to lie, or drugged her, or threatened her, made her believe that I was one of them. Mr. Swan, are you still there? I hung up the phone. They'd thought of everything. Even if Rebecca was truly free, and I hope she was, they'd turned her into a weapon against me. Her testimony would make me look like a co-conspirator rather than a witness. I looked at my laptop, at the photos I'd uploaded the night before. The threads were still active, still being shared, but I noticed that some of the images were being flagged as fake. Comments were appearing that questioned their authenticity, suggested they were staged, pointed out technical details that could indicate digital manipulation. They were fighting back, using their resources to discredit the evidence before it could gain traction. But they'd made one mistake. The photograph I'd taken in Millennium Park had captured more than just faces. In the background, reflected in the beam's distorted surface, I could see license plates, street signs, architectural details that could be used to verify the location and time, and in the corner of the image, barely visible but definitely there, was something they probably hadn't noticed. A white van, parked on the street behind the SUV. The same van I'd seen at the warehouse, and clearly visible on its side panel was a company logo, Meridian Holdings, with a phone number and address. I had a trail to follow. The Meridian Holdings office was in a bland commercial building in Schaumburg, the kind of place that housed accounting firms and insurance offices. I spent the morning watching it from a coffee shop across the street, looking for patterns of activity. At 11:30, a familiar figure emerged from the building. Tall, broad-shouldered, pale blue eyes. He walked to a black sedan and drove away, heading south toward the city, going to meet with the FBI probably, to coordinate Rebecca's testimony, to make sure all the stories aligned properly. I waited another hour, then crossed the street and entered the building. The directory showed Meridian Holdings in Suite 4112. I took the elevator up and found myself in a hallway that smelled of coffee and copier toner. The door to Suite 4112 was locked, but the neighboring office had a handwritten sign offering key copying services. I told the elderly man behind the counter that I'd locked myself out of my office and needed a locksmith recommendation. Happens all the time, he said cheerfully. But these electronic locks are tricky. Your best bet is to call the building manager. Electronic locks. I looked more carefully at the door to 412 and saw the small LED panel I'd missed before. No keyholes, just a numeric keypad. But electronic locks had a weakness that old-fashioned locks didn't. They kept records. I spent 20 minutes in the hallway pretending to make phone calls while actually watching people enter and exit nearby offices. Most of the codes seemed to be 4 digits. People favored patterns, 1, 2, 3, 4, or birth dates, or simple sequences. The pale-eyed man had struck me as someone who valued efficiency over creativity. I tried 124, nothing. 0000, nothing. One adhesive. The lock clicked open. Inside, Suite 412 looked like any other small office. Reception area with cheap furniture, a few framed prints on the walls, a hallway leading to what were probably individual offices. But there was no receptionist, no sound of activity. I checked the individual offices quickly. 2 were empty except for basic furniture. The third had a computer running on the desk, with multiple windows open to what looked like financial software. The 4th office made my blood freeze. The walls were covered with photographs, not Polaroids this time, but high-resolution digital prints. Hundreds of them, organized in neat rows like a gallery exhibition, all showing people in various states of terror and pain. But these weren't just trophies, they were advertisements. Each photograph had a small label underneath with a price and a brief description. Creative professional, age 24, excellent condition, $50,000. Graduate student, specialized interests accommodated, $75,000. Photographer with documentation skills, $100,000. They were selling people like art pieces. In the corner of the room, a laptop computer was open to what looked like an auction website. The current listings showed thumbnail images of people I recognized from missing persons reports, along with bidding information and delivery schedules. Rebecca Torres was listed there, marked as sold, delivery pending. I took photographs of everything I could see, working as quickly as possible. The walls, the computer screen, the price lists, the auction website, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or discredited. That's when I heard the elevator ding in the hallway outside. I grabbed the laptop and ran for the window. 4 stories up, no fire escape, no way down except falling. Behind me I could hear footsteps in the hallway, multiple people moving with purpose. The window opened onto a small ledge that ran around the building's exterior. I climbed out, pulling the laptop with me, just as the office door opened behind me. "He's here," someone shouted. "Check the other rooms." The ledge was maybe 18 inches wide, crumbling concrete that seemed to shift under my weight. 4 stories below, cars moved through the parking lot like toys. To my right, the ledge continued around the corner of the building to what looked like a construction area where scaffolding had been erected. I started moving toward it, trying not to look down, pressing my back against the building's facade. The laptop bag made the journey more difficult, but I couldn't leave it behind. It contained evidence that could save lives. Behind me, I heard the window slide open. "There he is," the pale-eyed man's voice, calm and patient as always. "Mr. Swan, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be." I reached the corner of the building and found myself looking at the scaffolding structure. It was maybe 6 feet away from the ledge, a gap I could probably jump under normal circumstances. But 4 stories up, with a laptop bag, in the wind, "Rebecca Torres is safe," he continued, his voice getting closer. "She's in a hospital, being cared for by professionals. She'll recover completely from her experience. But the 7 others I mentioned, their situations are about to become much less pleasant if you don't stop running." I looked back and saw him climbing out onto the ledge, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Behind him, 2 other figures were waiting by the window. 7 others, still alive, still waiting for rescue. I jumped. For a moment, I was flying through empty air, the laptop bag trailing behind me like a bizarre tail. Then my hands hit the scaffolding's metal framework, and I was swinging, scrambling, trying to find purchase on the narrow beams. The construction area was empty, covered with plastic sheeting that flapped in the wind like prayer flags. I climbed down the scaffolding as quickly as I could, not caring about the noise I was making. Speed was more important than stealth now. At ground level, I ran for the parking garage. My car was 3 blocks away, but I had the laptop and the photographs. I had evidence that couldn't be discredited or explained away. I had proof. The FBI field office was crawling with activity when I arrived. I walked straight to the front desk, placed the laptop on the counter, and said the words I'd been practicing during the drive over. "My name is Elijah Swan. I have evidence of a human trafficking operation, and I need to speak with someone immediately." They arrested me, of course. Rebecca Torres had told them I was involved, and running from the scene at Meridian Holdings didn't help my case. But the laptop I'd brought spoke louder than any testimony. The auction website led to servers in 3 different countries. The financial records showed transactions totaling millions of dollars over the past 5 years. The photographs matched missing persons cases dating back to 2009. Most importantly, the delivery schedules showed current locations where people were being held. The raids happened that night. 7 different locations across Chicago and the suburbs. They found 11 people alive, including the 7 the pale-eyed man had mentioned. Rebecca Torres had been telling the truth about being released, but she'd been drugged heavily enough that her memories of the event were confused and manipulated. The trials took 2 years. The pale-eyed man's name turned out to be Marcus Webb, a former military contractor who had been running the operation with funding from clients in 12 different countries. The scope of the network was larger than anyone had imagined. Dozens of people involved in procurement, transportation, security, and client services. I testified for weeks, walking judges and juries through the evidence I'd gathered, the photographs from the warehouse wall, the auction website, the financial records showing payments to offshore accounts. In the end, they convicted 34 people on charges ranging from kidnapping to murder to conspiracy. Marcus Webb got life without parole. Others received sentences ranging from 20 years to death. But the thing that haunts me isn't the trials or the testimony or the media attention that followed. It's the number. 37 cases that we solved, 11 people rescued alive. But the financial records suggested there had been others, dozens of others, over the years whose cases we never found. People who disappeared into a network that was larger and more sophisticated than what we managed to uncover. I still live in Chicago, though I moved to a different neighborhood. I still work as an accountant, though for a different firm. I still take photographs on weekends, though I'm much more careful about where I go. Sometimes, walking down the street, I'll see someone who looks familiar. A face from one of those missing persons reports. Maybe older, maybe changed, but possibly alive. I'll follow them for a block or two, trying to decide if I should approach them or leave them alone. I never approach them, because I learned something during those 2 years of trials and testimony. The network we uncovered was just one branch of something much larger. And while we cut off that branch, the root system remains intact. Somewhere out there, in other cities and other countries, the business continues. People disappear, photographs are taken, transactions are completed. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Marcus Webb was right about one thing. Maybe I was always meant to be part of this story. Maybe some of us are just born to be witnesses. This account was written in December 2016, 2 years after the events described. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and this document has been activated as planned. If you recognize any of the names or locations mentioned, please contact the FBI immediately. The investigation is ongoing. Elijah Swan. My name's Thomas Keegan, and what happened to me in October 2011 at Mount Revelstoke National Park in British Columbia still keeps me awake at night. 14 years later, I can still smell that rancid breath and hear those guttural sounds echoing through my dreams. I wasn't planning on having a run-in with anything scarier than a black bear that weekend. Hell, I would have welcomed a bear encounter over what actually found me up there. I'd made the trip alone because I needed to get away from everything. A messy breakup with Sarah, constant fights with my old man who thought I was wasting my life in a dead-end security job, and the general feeling that I was drowning in a life I never chose. The idea was simple. Hike for 3 days, maybe do some fishing at one of the alpine lakes, find some perspective in the wilderness, clear my head and figure out what the hell I was doing with my life. I was 28 and felt like I was already past my expiration date. I'd rented a small cabin through some sketchy website. Probably should have been my first red flag. The listing showed a rustic but cozy one-room cabin with basic amenities. What I found when I pulled up the gravel road in my beat-up Honda was more like a forgotten shack that time had been slowly reclaiming. The cabin squatted in a small clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even in the late afternoon, shadows dominated the space. The logs were weathered gray and green moss crept up the foundation like diseased fingers. Several roof shingles had blown off, leaving dark gaps that looked like missing teeth in a skull. The windows were so grimy they appeared black from the outside. When I pushed open the front door, it groaned on rusted hinges, and the smell hit me immediately, a combination of mildew, old wood, and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and unpleasant, like meat left too long in a warm place. Inside wasn't much better. A single room with a narrow bed shoved against one wall, a small wood-burning stove in the corner, and a tiny kitchen area with a pump handle for water. No electricity, no cell service, no connection to the outside world. Perfect for what I thought I needed. I tossed my backpack on the bed and noticed the mattress was damp to the touch. The cabin felt like it had been abandoned for months, maybe longer. Dust motes danced in the few rays of sunlight that managed to pierce the dirty windows. I found a broom in the corner and swept out what looked like animal droppings. Small dark pellets scattered near the door. After I got the place somewhat livable and managed to get a fire going in the stove, I cracked open a beer from my cooler and stepped outside to sit on the sagging porch. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and I made a mental note to watch where I stepped. The silence was the first thing that struck me. Not the peaceful quiet you'd expect in nature, but an oppressive absence of sound that seemed to press against my eardrums. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling through the trees, just dead air and the distant sound of my own heartbeat. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and focused on why I'd come here. Sarah's words from our last fight kept replaying in my head. "You're stuck, Thomas. You're 28 years old and you're stuck in the same place you were at 18. When are you going to start actually living?" She wasn't wrong. I'd been working security at the same office building for 6 years, coming home to the same cramped apartment, watching the same TV shows, drinking the same beer. The breakup had been inevitable, but it still stung. She'd already moved in with her yoga instructor before I'd even finished packing my stuff. As the sun began to set behind the treeland, the shadows grew longer and seemed to reach toward the cabin like grasping hands. I decided to take a quick hike before full darkness set in. Maybe explore some of the trails the park ranger had mentioned when I checked in earlier. Stay on the marked paths, Ranger Mitchell had warned me with a serious expression. We've had some unusual activity in the backcountry lately. Lost hikers, damaged campsites, could be bears, but he'd trailed off, shaking his head. Just stick to the main trails, especially after dark. I'd assumed he was just doing his job, keeping the city folk safe and on the designated routes. Now, standing in that unnatural silence, his warning felt more ominous. I grabbed my headlamp, a fixed-blade hunting knife my dad had given me years ago, and a bottle of water. The trail that started behind the cabin looked well-maintained, with wooden markers every 100 yards or so. I figured I'd follow it for a mile, maybe 2, then head back for dinner and an early night. The path wound through dense, old-growth forest, with trees so massive their trunks disappeared into the darkness above. Many of these Douglas firs and western hemlocks had been standing for centuries, their bark scarred by lightning and weather. Fallen logs created natural bridges over small ravines, and thick undergrowth filled the spaces between the giants. About half a mile in, I started hearing things. It began as a soft rustling in the brush to my left, like something small moving through the undergrowth. I stopped and listened, but the sound stopped too. When I continued walking, it started again. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" Hoping for a response from another hiker. Nothing. The trail curved to the right, following the contour of a steep hillside. To my left, the ground dropped away into a ravine filled with deadfall and shadows. To my right, the slope rose sharply, covered in dense ferns and young trees. That's when I heard the breathing, deep, rhythmic exhalations coming from somewhere ahead of me on the trail, too loud and too slow to be human. My hand instinctively went to the knife on my belt as I swept my headlamp beam across the path. 20 feet ahead, just at the edge of my light, I caught a glimpse of movement. Large, dark, hunched over, it seemed to be feeding on something, its back to me. The breathing got louder, more labored, and I could hear wet sounds, tearing, chewing. I took a step back, my boot snapping a small branch. The sounds stopped immediately. Whatever it was slowly began to turn toward me, and I got the distinct impression that it had been aware of my presence all along, that it had been waiting for me to find it. I didn't wait to see what it looked like. I spun around and ran back toward the cabin, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly as I crashed through the forest. Behind me, I heard a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something that made my skin crawl and my legs pump harder. When I burst through the cabin door, I was gasping for air and drenched in sweat despite the cool evening temperature. I slammed the door behind me and threw the deadbolt, then dragged the rickety kitchen table over to brace it. My hands were shaking as I lit the oil lamp I'd found earlier. The warm light pushed back some of the darkness, but the windows remained black mirrors reflecting my own pale face back at me. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. A bear, probably. Maybe a moose. Large animals were common in this area, and I'd surprised it while it was feeding. The sounds and movement could be explained by my imagination and adrenaline, but deep down I knew what I'd seen wasn't natural. The way it had moved, the deliberate quality of its breathing, the sense that it had been performing for my benefit, none of that fit with normal wildlife behavior. I grabbed my cell phone out of habit even though I knew there was no signal. The screen showed 0 bars and a nearly dead battery. I'd forgotten to bring a charger, figuring I'd be roughing it anyway. The fire in the stove had died down to glowing embers and the cabin was getting cold. I added more wood and tried to focus on normal tasks, opening a can of soup, boiling water on the camp stove, setting up my sleeping bag on the damp mattress. But every small sound made me jump. The settling of the old logs, the pop of burning wood, the wind that had finally started to move through the trees outside. I found myself constantly glancing at the windows, expecting to see something looking back. Around 10 o'clock, exhaustion finally began to outweigh my anxiety. I banked the fire, blew out the oil lamp, and crawled into my sleeping bag fully clothed, the knife within easy reach. The last thing I remember before falling into an uneasy sleep was the sound of something large moving around outside the cabin, circling it slowly in the darkness. I woke to the sound of scratching, soft at first, almost tentative, like fingernails dragging across wood. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then the smell of cold ashes and mildew brought it all back. The cabin, the trail, the thing I'd encountered in the forest. The scratching continued, methodical and patient. It was coming from the front door. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heartbeat. The digital display on my watch showed 2:47 a.m. Outside, the night was absolute. No moon, no stars visible through the dirty windows. The scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing coming from just outside the door. Each exhalation lasted several seconds, followed by a pause, then a long, wet inhalation. I reached slowly for the knife beside my pillow, my fingers closing around the familiar grip. The breathing continued, and I realized whatever was out there wasn't trying to be quiet. It wanted me to know it was there. A new sound joined the breathing, a soft sniffing, like a dog investigating an interesting scent. It moved along the base of the door, then seemed to travel around to the window on the right side of the cabin. The sniffing grew more intense, more urgent. Then came the first impact. The entire cabin shuddered as something massive slammed into the side wall. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and I heard one of the window frames crack. I bit down on my tongue to keep from crying out. Another impact, this time against the back wall. Then another on the left side. Whatever was out there was huge, and it was testing the structure, looking for weak points. The attack stopped as suddenly as they'd begun, leaving me in suffocating silence. I counted 60 seconds, then another 60, nothing. Just as I began to think it had moved on, I heard a new sound that made my skin crawl. Voices, human voices, but wrong somehow. The words were unclear, like people trying to speak with mouths full of water, but the tone was unmistakably conversational. There were at least 3 distinct voices, maybe more, having what sounded like a casual discussion just outside my walls. One voice would speak for several seconds in that garbled, liquid language, then another would respond. Occasionally, one of them would laugh, a sound like glass breaking underwater. The conversation continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, without warning, all the voices spoke at once, building to a crescendo that resolved into a single unified howl that seemed to come from every direction at once. The sound went on, rising and falling in pitch, until my ears actually began to hurt. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed felt heavy and expectant. I waited in my sleeping bag, knife clutched in my sweating palm, for something else to happen. But the night had returned to its unnatural quiet, as if nothing had occurred. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake until dawn, every nerve ending on high alert, jumping at every small sound the cabin made. When the first gray light finally began to seep through the windows, I felt like I'd aged a decade in a single night. I climbed out of my sleeping bag and immediately went to examine the door and windows. The scratches were there, deep gouges in the wood that definitely hadn't been there the day before. Whatever had made them had claws like railroad spikes. The window frame on the right side was cracked exactly as I'd heard, and when I looked outside, I could see depressions in the soft earth around the cabin, footprints, but unlike anything in any wildlife guide. They were roughly humanoid in shape but enormous, at least twice the size of my own boot prints. The impressions showed what looked like elongated toes ending in deep claw marks. The stride length suggested something with legs much longer than human proportions would allow. But here's what really disturbed me. The prints circled the cabin dozens of times, creating worn paths in the earth. This hadn't been a brief visit. Whatever these things were, they'd been out there for hours, walking around and around my temporary shelter like sharks circling prey. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to think rationally about my situation. I had 2 more days on the cabin rental, but every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to pack up and leave immediately. The problem was, my Honda was parked about half a mile away at the end of the access road. Getting to it meant walking through the forest where those things lived. In daylight, the forest looked different but no less threatening. The unnatural silence persisted. No bird song, no insect buzz, no small animals rustling through the undergrowth. It was as if every normal inhabitant of the woods had fled, leaving the territory to something else. I spent the morning reinforcing the cabin's defenses, using rope from my pack to secure the windows and propping furniture against the door. I also inventoried my supplies, enough food for 3 days, a full water bottle and access to the hand pump, plenty of firewood, and my knife. I had a small first aid kit, a few tools, and not much else. My biggest concern was the lack of communication. No cell service, no landline, no way to call for help if things went bad. The park ranger station was 15 miles away by road, and I wasn't even sure of the exact route from here. Around noon, I decided to venture outside and examine the area more thoroughly in daylight. Maybe I could find some clue about what I was dealing with, or at least confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. The scratch marks on the door were even more impressive in full light. The gouges went deep into the wood, and the pattern suggested claws much larger than any bear or mountain lion. Some of the scratches were nearly a foot long, carved in parallel lines that spoke of enormous paws with multiple talons. Following the footprints around the cabin, I noticed they weren't random. The creatures had established specific patrol routes, walking the same paths over and over until they'd worn shallow trenches in the earth. The prints showed they'd spent considerable time at each window, and several times they'd stopped directly in front of the door. But the most disturbing discovery was what I found on the far side of the clearing. A pile of bones, picked clean and white in the morning sun. Most were small, squirrels, rabbits, birds, but scattered among them were larger remains that I couldn't immediately identify. The bones had been cracked open, presumably to get at the marrow, and they were arranged in a rough circle about 6 feet across. In the center of the bone circle was something that made my stomach lurch. A hiking boot, still laced but empty, with dark stains around the opening that could only be dried blood. The sole was worn in a pattern I recognized, Vibram treads, the kind used on expensive trail boots. I photographed everything with my digital camera, thinking that if I somehow made it out of here alive, I'd need evidence that this had really happened. The pictures looked surreal on the small LCD screen, like props from a horror movie. As I worked my way around the clearing, documenting the evidence, I began to feel like I was being watched. The sensation grew stronger with each passing minute, a prickling between my shoulder blades that made me constantly look over my shoulder. The tree line was thick and dark, with countless hiding places where something large could crouch unseen. I caught myself scanning the shadows obsessively, looking for any sign of movement or the glint of watching eyes. When I found the second pile of bones on the opposite side of the clearing, I realized this place had been used as a feeding ground for a long time. This pile was older, the bones weathered and scattered by rain and wind. Among the remains, I found a park ranger's badge, the metal green and corroded but still readable. Parks, Canada, B. Mitchell. My blood ran cold. Mitchell was the ranger who'd checked me in, who'd warned me to stay on the trails. According to the badge, his first name was Brian, but I'd spoken to him just yesterday, and he'd seemed perfectly healthy and normal. Unless the thing I'd talked to at the ranger station wasn't Brian Mitchell at all. I ran back to the cabin, my mind racing with possibilities that I didn't want to consider. If these creatures could somehow mimic human appearance or behavior, if they were intelligent enough to infiltrate human spaces, then my situation was far worse than I'd imagined. Inside the cabin, I barricaded the door again and tried to think through what I knew. The rental had been arranged through a website that looked legitimate but could have been fake. The ranger who'd checked me in might not have been human, and I was alone in the wilderness with creatures that collected trophies from their victims. I'd been led here deliberately. This wasn't a random encounter with wildlife. It was a trap. As if responding to my realization, I heard movement in the forest surrounding the cabin. Not the footsteps from the night before, but a rustling in the canopy above. When I looked up through the dirty skylight, I could see dark shapes moving through the treetops, leaping from branch to branch with impossible agility. They were positioning themselves for something, and I was running out of time. The attack came just before sunset. I'd spent the afternoon strengthening my defenses and trying to formulate an escape plan, but deep down I knew I was trapped. The creatures had chosen this location carefully, isolated, no communication, no easy exit routes. They'd probably been using it as a hunting ground for years. The first sign of trouble was the smell. A rancid odor began seeping through the cabin walls, like meat rotting in the summer heat mixed with wet animal fur. It grew stronger by the minute until I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. Then came the sounds. Not the voices from the night before, but something worse. Scratching and scraping coming from above. They were on the roof. Heavy footsteps moved back and forth across the wooden shingles, and I could hear claws gouging into the old wood. Splinters and debris rained down through the gaps in the ceiling, and I realized they were trying to tear their way in from above. I grabbed the oil lamp and moved to the center of the room, away from the walls and ceiling. The knife felt pathetically small in my hand, but it was all I had. Outside, more movement in the trees suggested a coordinated assault was beginning. The first window exploded inward in a shower of glass and rotten wood. A massive arm thrust through the opening, covered in matted dark fur but ending in a hand that was disturbingly human-like except for the claws that curved like scythe blades from each finger. The arm swept back and forth, feeling for the window latch or anything it could grab. When it encountered the furniture I'd stacked as a barricade, it began tearing the pieces apart with casual strength, splintering wood like it was made of paper. I stabbed at the arm with my knife, and the blade bit deep into the flesh between two knuckles. The thing howled, a sound that was part animal rage and part human scream, and yanked its arm back through the window. But the damage was done. They'd found a way in. More windows began to shatter as additional arms forced their way through. The creatures seemed to have learned from the first one's mistake and were more cautious about reaching inside, but they systematically destroyed my barricades piece by piece. Through the growing gaps, I caught glimpses of them in the lamplight. They were enormous, at least 8 feet tall when standing upright, but they seemed to prefer moving in a hunched, ape-like posture that made them appear even more massive. Their bodies were covered in thick, dark fur that looked oily and unkempt, but their faces were the worst part. They had the general structure of human features, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but everything was wrong. The proportions were off, the eyes too large and set too far apart, the mouths too wide and filled with too many teeth. Some of the teeth looked human, as if they'd been taken from previous victims and somehow incorporated into their own jaws. When they looked at me through the broken windows, I saw intelligence there. These weren't just animals acting on instinct. They were thinking, planning, savoring the fear they could smell on me. One of them began to laugh, that same glass-breaking underwater sound I'd heard the night before. The others joined in, creating a chorus of inhuman mirth that echoed through the forest. The roof creaking intensified, and suddenly a section of the ceiling caved in. Chunks of wood and roofing material crashed down, followed by a creature that landed in a crouch just 10 feet away from me. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its fur was matted with what looked like dried blood and other substances I didn't want to identify. Its hands were definitely human in structure but scaled up to impossible size, with fingernails that had grown into claws through neglect or design. But it was the eyes that nearly broke my sanity. They were human eyes, bright blue, like my ex-girlfriend Sarah's, but set in that monstrous face. As I stared into them, I realized these things had once been people. The creature cocked its head to one side and spoke in a voice that was almost recognizable. "Thomas, we've been waiting for you." The voice was Sarah's, but distorted and wrong, like a recording played through broken speakers. The thing's mouth didn't move properly when it spoke, the words seeming to come from somewhere else entirely. "Sarah?" I whispered, knowing it was impossible but unable to stop myself from hoping. "She was delicious," the creature replied, and this time the voice was my father's. "Just like you're going to be." I screamed and charged at it with the knife, but it moved faster than anything that size should have been able to. One massive hand swatted me aside like I was a mosquito, and I crashed into the wall hard enough to see stars. More creatures were pouring through the windows now, and the cabin filled with their rancid smell and inhuman sounds. They didn't rush to finish me off, though. Instead, they began to circle me, making that liquid conversation noise I'd heard before. As my vision cleared, I realized they were arguing about something. Different voices, some familiar, some not, debated in that underwater language while they watched me struggle to get back on my feet. One of them, slightly smaller than the others, gestured toward me and spoke in what sounded like Ranger Mitchell's voice. "He's stronger than the others. He might last longer." "More fun," agreed another in a voice I didn't recognize. They were discussing how to play with me before they killed me. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. The knife had been knocked from my hand and lay somewhere in the debris. The oil lamp was still burning, casting dancing shadows on the walls and making the creature's movements seem even more otherworldly. The lamp, I grabbed it and hurled it as hard as I could at the nearest creature. The glass shattered against its chest, and burning oil splashed across its fur. The thing shrieked and began rolling on the floor, trying to extinguish the flames. The fire spread faster than I'd expected. The old, dry wood of the cabin caught immediately, and within seconds half the room was ablaze. The creatures fell back, apparently as afraid of fire as any normal animal would be. I saw my chance and took it. The window behind me was broken but still partially blocked by debris. I threw myself through it, not caring about the glass that tore at my clothes and skin. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I was free of the burning cabin. I hit the ground running and didn't look back. Behind me I could hear the creatures howling as they fled the spreading flames, but I was already crashing through the forest toward where I'd left my car. The trees seemed to grab at me with every step, branches catching my clothes and roots trying to trip me. My headlamp had been lost in the fight, so I was running blind through the darkness, guided only by instinct and desperation. Something was following me. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth parallel to my path. Every few seconds I'd catch a glimpse of a large dark shape keeping pace through the trees. It was hurting me, I realized, driving me towards some predetermined destination. I tried to veer off course, But every time I changed direction, the thing in the trees would cut me off, forcing me back onto the path it wanted me to take. After 10 minutes of this deadly game, I understood where I was being led, back to the bone circle I'd found that morning. When I stumbled into the clearing, gasping for breath, I saw them all waiting for me. At least a dozen of the creatures, standing in a loose circle around the pile of bones. They'd known exactly where I would end up. In the center of the group, one creature stood taller than the rest. Its fur was silver rather than dark, and when it spoke, the voice was clearer than the others. "Welcome to our home, Thomas. We've prepared a place for you." It gestured with one clawed hand toward a depression in the earth that I hadn't noticed before. A shallow grave, just my size. The creatures began to close in, and I knew my time was up. But as they approached, I heard something that made them all freeze in place. Sirens. Distant but getting closer. Someone had seen the fire. The sirens changed everything. The creatures froze when they heard the sound, their heads turning toward the direction of the approaching emergency vehicles like predators suddenly aware of a larger threat. For a moment that lasted an eternity, we all stood motionless in the bone circle. Me gasping for breath in the center, the monsters surrounding me, and somewhere in the distance, help racing through the night. The silver-furred leader let out a sound I'll never be able to describe properly. Part howl, part command, part expression of pure rage. The others responded immediately, melting back into the forest with a speed that defied their massive size, but they didn't go far. I could sense them watching from the tree line, waiting to see how this new development would play out. I started shouting at the top of my lungs, hoping my voice would carry to whoever was responding to the fire. "Help! I'm here! Help me!" The words echoed through the forest, and I kept screaming until my throat was raw. The sirens grew louder, and soon I could see flashing lights filtering through the trees. Fire trucks, police cars, maybe an ambulance, the whole emergency response for this remote area. I'd never been so happy to see red and blue lights in my life. The first responder to reach me was a real park ranger, not like the thing that had checked me in. This one was young, maybe 25, with short blonde hair and eyes that widened when she saw the state I was in. "Sir, are you injured? We got reports of a structure fire and..." She trailed off as she took in my appearance. My clothes were torn and bloody from crashing through the window. My face was streaked with soot and sweat, and I probably looked completely insane. "They're still out there," I gasped, pointing toward the tree line. "In the forest. They killed people. There are bones." She followed my gesture toward the bone circle, and her expression changed from concern to alarm. Even in the dim light from her flashlight, the pile of remains was clearly visible. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, then spoke into her radio. "Command, this is Ranger Davidson. I need backup at the bone site immediately, and get me a forensics team out here. We've got human remains." More responders arrived within minutes. The fire department was dealing with the blazing cabin, but several police officers and additional rangers converged on our location. When they saw the bone circle, the mood shifted from rescue operation to crime scene investigation. Detective Morrison, a heavy-set man in his 50s, took charge of the scene. He listened to my story with the patient expression of someone who'd heard a lot of strange tales over the years. But his demeanor changed when the other officers started finding evidence. "Sarge, you need to see this," called one of the younger cops. He was kneeling next to the bone pile, carefully moving remains with a stick. "Some of these bones show tool marks, and there's more than one skeleton here." Another officer found additional burial sites scattered around the clearing. Shallow depressions that, when excavated, revealed more bones, personal effects, and the remains of camping gear. It was becoming clear that this place had been used as a disposal site for multiple victims over an extended period. "How many people are we talking about?" Detective Morrison asked the forensics technician who'd arrived to document the scene. "Hard to say without proper excavation, but based on what I can see, at least 6, maybe more. Some of these remains are fairly recent, others could be years old." As the investigation continued, I found myself repeatedly looking toward the forest, knowing the creatures were still out there. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, and every sound made me jump. The other responders were focused on the evidence, but I was waiting for the attack that I knew had to be coming. Ranger Davidson stayed close to me, apparently assigned to keep the witness calm and available for questioning. She seemed like a good person, genuinely concerned about my welfare and clearly disturbed by what we'd found. "You said they were still alive when you saw them?" she asked quietly. "These creatures? They're not animals," I told her. "They can think, plan, coordinate, and they can mimic human voices. The thing that checked me in yesterday, the one who called himself Ranger Mitchell, that wasn't human." She frowned. Mitchell? Brian Mitchell? He's been missing for 3 weeks. We found his truck abandoned on the access road, but no sign of him. The badge I'd found made sense now. These things had taken Mitchell weeks ago, and one of them had been impersonating him, using his identity to lure new victims to the cabin. How many people have gone missing in this area? I asked. More than we like to admit, she said grimly. Usually solo hikers or small groups. We assumed it was just the usual wilderness hazards, getting lost, falling into ravines, bear attacks, but this, she gestured toward the bone circle. This is something else entirely. Detective Morrison approached us, his expression grim. Mr. Keegan, I need you to walk me through everything that happened, from the beginning. Don't leave out any details, no matter how strange they might sound. I told him everything. The fake ranger, the cabin that was clearly a trap, the night attacks, the voices, the intelligence I'd seen in their eyes. He listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Keegan, what you're describing, it doesn't match any known animal behavior. Are you certain you weren't suffering from hypothermia, dehydration, or some other condition that might cause hallucinations? Look at the evidence, I said, pointing to the scratches on nearby trees, the footprints in the soft earth, the systematic arrangement of the bones. This wasn't done by bears or mountain lions, and it sure as hell wasn't a hallucination. Before he could respond, one of the officers shouted from the edge of the clearing. Contact! Something moving in the trees. Every flashlight and weapon in the area swung toward the forest. For a moment, everything was still. Then we heard it. That liquid conversation sound, coming from multiple directions around the perimeter. What the hell is that? Morrison muttered. The sounds grew louder and more agitated, and I realized the creatures were communicating about the human presence in their territory. They were deciding what to do about all these witnesses. We need to get out of here, I said urgently. Right now. They don't like being exposed, and there are too many of us here. They're going to attack. Morrison looked skeptical, but Ranger Davidson was already moving toward the radio. Command, this is Davidson. We need immediate extraction for all personnel at the bone site. Priority 1. The response crackled back. Davidson, explain the threat assessment. Before she could answer, the first tree came down. A massive Douglas fir, at least 100 feet tall, crashed across the path we'd used to reach the clearing. The impact shook the ground and sent up a cloud of dust and debris. Emergency vehicles on the other side began honking their horns as they found their escape route blocked. Another tree fell, then another. Within minutes, the creatures had effectively trapped us in the clearing by dropping strategic timber across all the access routes. The coordination required for such an operation was terrifying. They were thinking several steps ahead, cutting off our retreat before launching their assault. How the hell are they dropping trees that size? Morrison demanded. I'd seen their strength firsthand in the cabin. They're strong enough to push them over, and smart enough to know which ones will block the roads. The radio chatter became increasingly frantic as the emergency responders realized they were cut off from outside support. The fire trucks couldn't reach us, the ambulance couldn't get out, and backup units couldn't get in. We were exactly where the creatures wanted us. The attacks began with sniper precision. One by one, the responders who'd spread out to examine the evidence began to disappear. A scream from the darkness, the sound of a struggle, then silence. Each time we'd rush toward the disturbance, we'd find nothing but scattered equipment and dark stains on the forest floor. Everyone stay together, Morrison shouted. Tight formation, weapons ready, but his orders came too late. They'd already picked off 4 people, including the forensics technician and 2 of the younger officers. The remaining group huddled in the center of the bone circle, flashlights creating a pool of light surrounded by pressing darkness. That's when I realized what was really happening. The creatures weren't just hunting us, they were collecting us. Each person they took would become a new voice for their arsenal, a new identity they could assume to lure future victims. They're not going to kill us all at once, I told the group. They want us alive. They need us. For what? Ranger Davidson asked, though her pale face suggested she didn't really want to know the answer. Before I could respond, one of the remaining officers screamed and pointed toward the tree line. Dozens of eyes had appeared in the darkness, reflecting our flashlight beams like mirrors. The creatures had surrounded us completely and they were moving closer. Detective Morrison raised his service weapon, but I grabbed his arm. Shooting them will just make them angry, and there are too many of them. Then, what do you suggest? He demanded. I looked around at the terrified faces of the responders, then at the bone circle where we stood. Somewhere in the distance I could hear more sirens, backup units that wouldn't be able to reach us through the blocked roads. We run, I said. all together, in one direction, and we don't stop for anything. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one we had. The creatures were closing in, and our time was almost up. When I say go, we run straight north, I whispered to the huddled group of survivors. Stay together, don't stop for anything, and don't look back. Detective Morrison checked his weapon one more time. What's north? The main road is about 2 miles through the forest. If we can reach it, there might be backup units waiting. Ranger Davidson pulled out her GPS unit. The terrain's rough, but it's our best shot. There's a creek about halfway that might slow them down. Around us, the eyes in the darkness had multiplied. I counted at least 20 distinct pairs, which meant we were facing more creatures than I'd originally thought. They'd been collecting people for a long time, growing their numbers, expanding their territory. The remaining members of our group, myself, Detective Morrison, Ranger Davidson, Officer Chen, and Firefighter Rodriguez, pressed closer together as the circle of eyes tightened around us. Each person carried a flashlight, but the combined beams only seemed to make the surrounding darkness more absolute. One of the creatures stepped forward into our light, and I heard Officer Chen gasp. It was wearing Ranger Mitchell's uniform, or what was left of it. The fabric was torn and stained, but the name tag was still visible. The thing inside the uniform had Mitchell's face, but the features were wrong, stretched and distorted like a mask that didn't quite fit. There's no need to run, it said in Mitchell's voice. We just want to welcome you to our family. Family? Detective Morrison raised his gun. You killed these people. The Mitchell thing tilted its head. Killed? No. We improved them, made them better, made them like us. It gestured to the other creatures surrounding us. They're all still here. In a way, I realized with growing horror that each of the creatures wore some article of human clothing or carried some personal item. Watches, jewelry, fragments of outdoor gear, trophies from their victims, or maybe something more. They're wearing their faces, I whispered. That's how they mimic voices. They take pieces of their victims and incorporate them somehow. Ranger Davidson turned pale. That's impossible. That's evolutionary. The Mitchell thing finished for her. We adapt, we learn, we become. More creatures began to speak, each in a different human voice. I heard the forensics technician we'd lost earlier, one of the missing officers. Voices I didn't recognize, but that sounded terrifyingly normal and human. It doesn't hurt, said one creature in a young woman's voice. The transformation is actually quite pleasant once you stop fighting it. We could use someone with your survival instincts, another added, looking directly at me. You'd make a valuable addition to our collective. That's when I understood their real purpose. They weren't just predators, they were recruiters. Each victim became part of their growing intelligence network, adding new skills, new knowledge, new ways to interact with the human world. Now, I shouted, and our group exploded into motion. We crashed through the circle of creatures, heading north toward the distant road. Behind us, howls of rage echoed through the forest as our captors realized we were escaping their psychological web. The pursuit began immediately. Heavy footsteps crashed through the undergrowth behind us, accompanied by that liquid conversation noise, as the creatures coordinated their chase. They moved through the forest with the confidence of things that knew every tree, every route, every possible path. Officer Chen was the first to fall. She tripped over a fallen log about a quarter mile from the clearing, and before any of us could help her, something massive emerged from the shadows and dragged her into the darkness. Her scream cut off abruptly, replaced by satisfied growling sounds. Keep moving, Morrison gasped, but I could hear the fear in his voice. He was a career cop used to dealing with human criminals, but this was beyond his experience. Rodriguez, the firefighter, was in the best shape among us and took the lead, using his axe to clear branches and debris from our path. His professional calm was reassuring, but I could see the strain in his movements as he pushed us harder and faster through the treacherous terrain. The creek Ranger Davidson had mentioned turned out to be more of a small river, swollen by recent rains. The water was waist-deep and moving fast, with slippery rocks that made crossing treacherous in the dark. Will this slow them down? Morrison asked as we waded across. For a few minutes, I replied, though I wasn't optimistic. The creatures had shown they could adapt to any obstacle we'd encountered so far. On the far side of the creek, we found ourselves in a different type of forest, younger trees with thicker undergrowth that made progress slower but provided better concealment. Rodriguez continued to hack our way through with his axe while the rest of us tried to move as quietly as possible. The sounds of pursuit had fallen behind, but I knew better than to think we'd lost them. They were probably spreading out, trying to get ahead of us and set up another ambush. How much further to the road? Rodriguez asked, pausing to catch his breath. Davidson checked her GPS again. About a mile, but the terrain gets rougher from here. She was right. The ground began to slope upward sharply, and we found ourselves climbing over boulders and fallen trees in near total darkness. Every step was a risk. A twisted ankle or serious fall would mean death for whoever went down. That's when we heard the helicopters. The sound of rotors echoed through the forest, and searchlights began sweeping through the trees ahead of us. Someone had realized the ground units were in trouble and called in air support. "Here!" Rodriguez shouted, waving his flashlight above his head. "We're here!" One of the searchlights found us immediately, the brilliant white beam cutting through the darkness like a blessing from above. A voice boomed down from a loudspeaker. "Ground personnel, identify yourselves. Detective Morrison, Revelstoke PD." Morrison called back. "We have multiple casualties and need immediate extraction." "Roger that. We're setting up a landing zone on the road ahead. Can you reach our position?" "Affirmative. ETA 5 minutes." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. We were going to make it out of here alive. That's when the creatures made their final play. The attack came from above. They'd climbed into the canopy and were now dropping down on us like massive furry spiders. The first one landed directly on Rodriguez, driving him to the ground with crushing force. His axe flew from his hands, clattering away into the darkness. Ranger Davidson drew her service weapon and fired 3 quick shots into the creature's center mass. The bullets had no visible effect. If anything, they seemed to make it more aggressive. It backhanded her with casual strength, sending her flying into a tree trunk. Morrison and I tried to help Rodriguez, but more creatures were dropping from the trees around us. We found ourselves back to back, surrounded by at least 6 of the monsters, their eyes reflecting the helicopter searchlights in an unnatural way. "This is it," Morrison muttered, chambering around. "I'm not going out without a fight." But the creatures didn't attack. Instead, they began to speak in unison, using voices we recognized. Officer Chen, the forensics technician, others who'd been taken during the night. "You can't escape what you are," they said. "You can't escape what you're going to become." The helicopters were circling overhead, but the pilots seemed confused by what they were seeing. How do you explain a group of monsters speaking in human voices to a rational mind? That's when I remembered something from my brief military service years ago. Emergency flares. I'd been carrying one in my pack the entire time. I pulled the flare from my backpack and ignited it. The brilliant red light exploded through the forest, casting everything in hellish shadows but clearly illuminating the creatures for the helicopters above. The reaction was immediate. Machine gun fire erupted from the aircraft, heavy caliber rounds that sent the creatures scattering for cover. Whatever these things were, they weren't bulletproof against military-grade weapons. "Extraction zone, 100 meters north," the loudspeaker announced. "Move now." We ran through the chaos of gunfire and monster screams, supporting the injured Ranger Davidson between us. Behind us, I could hear the creatures regrouping, calling to each other in their liquid language, but the helicopter guns kept them pinned down. The road appeared ahead of us like a stripe of salvation cutting through the wilderness. Emergency vehicles lined both sides, ambulances, police cars, fire trucks, and military vehicles I didn't recognize. Someone had decided this situation warranted serious firepower. We stumbled onto the asphalt, just as one of the helicopters touched down in a cleared area. Medics rushed forward to take Davidson from us, while military personnel formed a defensive perimeter facing the forest. "Sir, we need you to report to the incident commander immediately," a soldier told me, pointing toward a command vehicle bristling with antennas and communication equipment. As I walked toward the truck, I looked back at the forest one last time. The helicopters were still circling, their searchlights probing the darkness, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. The creatures were smart enough to go deep underground when faced with superior firepower. They were probably already planning their next hunting ground, their next set of victims. The bone circle had been just one of many feeding sites, and they'd simply abandon it now that it was compromised. Inside the command vehicle, a colonel with graying hair and tired eyes debriefed me for 3 hours. I told him everything, just as I'd told Detective Morrison. Unlike the local police, though, the military seemed to take my story seriously. "Mr. Keegan, what you've described matches reports from other remote areas across North America," the colonel said finally. "We've been tracking these incidents for several years now. There are more of them." "We believe so. Different groups, different territories, but the same basic pattern. They seem to be spreading. Or maybe we're just getting better at recognizing the signs." He showed me a map with dozens of red pins scattered across the continent. Each pin represented a location where similar evidence had been found: bone circles, missing persons with specific profiles, reports of creatures that could mimic human speech. "What are they?" I asked. We don't know. Maybe there's something that's always been out there, just staying hidden. Maybe there's something new, an evolutionary adaptation to human expansion into their territory. Or maybe, he paused, looking uncomfortable. Maybe there's something we created somehow. I spent 2 more days giving statements to various agencies, submitting to medical examinations and answering the same questions over and over. The official story, when it finally hit the news, was sanitized almost beyond recognition. A gas leak had caused hallucinations among campers and responders. The bodies found at the site were attributed to historical burial practices by indigenous peoples. The truth was buried in classified files that would probably never see the light of day. Detective Morrison recovered from his injuries and returned to duty, but he requested a transfer to urban assignments. Ranger Davidson took medical retirement and moved to the city. Rodriguez went back to fighting fires and never spoke publicly about what happened. As for me, I moved as far from the wilderness as I could get. I found a job in downtown Vancouver, got a small apartment with multiple locks and security cameras, and tried to rebuild my life in a place where the worst predators walked on 2 legs and carried guns instead of claws. But I still have nightmares. I still wake up in the middle of the night listening for liquid voices and the sound of breathing outside my windows. And sometimes, when I'm walking downtown in the middle of a crowd, I'll hear a voice I recognize, Officer Chen asking for directions, or the forensics technician ordering coffee. I know they're still out there, learning, adapting, growing their numbers. The bone circle at Mount Revelstoke was just one feeding ground among many. And somewhere in the wilderness they're getting better at mimicking us, better at fitting into our world. The colonel was right about one thing. They are spreading. I've started collecting news stories about missing hikers, abandoned campsites, and unexplained animal attacks in remote areas. The pattern is always the same, just in different locations. They're not just hunting us anymore. They're studying us, learning how we think, how we behave, how we communicate. Each victim makes them smarter, more human, more dangerous, and I'm probably the only person alive who knows what's really happening in the deep woods where cell phones don't work and help is days away. Sometimes I think about going back, about trying to warn people or help the authorities track these things down. But then I remember those eyes in the darkness, the voices of the dead speaking from inhuman throats, and the bone circle where they plan to bury me. Instead, I stay in the city, and I try to forget. But every time I see a news report about missing campers or unexplained wilderness deaths, I know the truth. The wild ones are still out there, and they're getting closer to our world every day.